Jason Carter had always been a quiet observer, the kind of person who sat at the back of the room, listening more than speaking. But today, as he stepped into the prestigious lecture hall at Ivy Ridge University, he felt an unfamiliar weight in the air. The room was filled with the best and brightest from all over the country, their sharp minds and polished personas filling every corner. It was a place where expectations were high, and anything less than perfect was quickly dismissed. Jason, on the other hand, was different. His brown eyes were filled with curiosity, his dark hair slightly messy from the rushed morning he'd had. His clothes were nice but clearly not from any high-end store. He wasn't rich, and he certainly didn't come from a legacy of prestigious families. He was just a kid from a small town in Kentucky, raised by a single mother who always encouraged him to study harder, to do better, and to never let his background define him. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was his voice. His accent. As Jason walked in, trying to find a seat in the crowded room, he could feel the eyes on him. It wasn't just the way he looked, unassuming, with a little awkwardness, it was his voice. The thick Kentucky drawl that followed him everywhere. The sound of his words, slow and deep, filled with the unique rhythm of his hometown. "Is that a country boy I see?" A voice from the front of the room broke the silence, and Jason's heart dropped. Emily was one of the first to speak, her blonde hair perfectly styled and her eyes glinting with the kind of confidence that came with privilege. Jason tried to ignore the comment and walked to the back of the room, taking a seat in the corner. But the whispers started immediately. "Can you believe that?" Brian said, his tone dripping with mockery. He was sitting a few rows ahead, clearly the type who had the money and status to back up his sharp words. "He looks like he walked right out of a tractor field." The room erupted in laughter, and Jason's face flushed. He knew they were talking about him. He didn't need to hear every word. It was clear they thought him out of place, like he didn't belong here. Jason took a deep breath and tried to steady his racing thoughts. "Just focus on the class, Jason. Focus on why you're here." But the teasing didn't stop. Sophie, who was sitting beside Emily, leaned over and whispered loud enough for Jason to hear. "I bet he doesn't even know what polyglot means. Who let him in here?" Jason squeezed his notebook tightly, his fingers white with tension. This was going to be harder than he thought. The Ivy Ridge University had been his dream, his escape from the small town, from the expectations of people who saw him as nothing more than a product of his surroundings. But now, in this moment, he wasn't sure if he was ready to handle the judgment that came with being here. He couldn't help but feel a pang of self-doubt. Was he really that different? Did they have a point? Before he could spiral further into his thoughts, the professor walked in, effectively cutting off the laughter. The room fell silent, and Jason took a deep breath. He needed to focus, to prove them wrong. He wasn't going to let a few superficial jabs define his future. The professor, Dr. Hargrove, was an older man with glasses that sat low on his nose. He adjusted his tie before addressing the class. "Welcome to the first day of advanced philosophy. This course is designed to challenge your thinking, to push you beyond the boundaries of what you think you know." Jason tried to keep his attention on the professor, but his mind kept drifting back to the laughter. He could still hear it echoing in his ears. "You can't let them get to you," he reminded himself. "You're here for a reason. You belong here." But as the class went on, Jason found himself in the same position as before, an outsider. Every word he spoke, every answer he gave, seemed to be met with a sneer or a sideways glance. Emily and Brian, the self-proclaimed leaders of this elite group, didn't even try to hide their disdain. They smirked every time Jason's accent slipped out, and their laughter was never far behind. It wasn't just the mocking. It was the judgment that stung the most. After class, as Jason gathered his things, he overheard Emily and Brian talking near the door. "Do you think he even knows how to pronounce Kant?" Emily giggled. "He probably thinks it's a new type of country music." Brian chuckled, and Jason felt his stomach twist. They were cruel. They didn't even try to hide it. They didn't see Jason for who he was, they saw only his accent, his background, and the way he didn't fit in with their idea of who should be sitting in this room. As he left the classroom, the laughter followed him, but Jason did his best to ignore it. This was just the beginning, he told himself. I won't let them define me. But as he made his way through the campus, the weight of their judgment pressed down on him. He had worked so hard to get here, to be in this place, and yet all he could think about was how small he felt now. The world he had once dreamed of had become a place of alienation and ridicule. Jason stopped by a bench and sat down, staring at the sprawling campus around him. The sun was shining brightly, and the trees swayed gently in the breeze, but he felt none of that warmth. He only felt cold. Am I really cut out for this? He thought. Maybe I'm not meant to be here. Maybe they're right. But just as the thought began to take root, Jason remembered something. His mother's voice echoed in his mind, Jason, never let anyone tell you you're not enough. You are enough, just as you are. Jason stood up, taking a deep breath. This was just one moment, one group of people. He wouldn't let them break him. He had a lot to prove. Not to them, but to himself. Jason wiped the doubt from his mind and walked toward the library. He didn't need their approval. He didn't need their validation. What he needed was to focus on the one thing he knew he had, his intellect. And soon, he would show them that no amount of mockery could ever diminish the power of his mind. As he walked through the campus, the whispers faded into the background. Jason had a plan, and nothing, not even the laughter, would stop him from proving his worth. This was only the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jason Carter sat at the edge of his dorm room bed, staring at the half-open suitcase on the floor. The items inside were familiar, his worn-out leather jacket, his favorite books, a stack of letters from his mother. They were pieces of his past, pieces of the small town in Kentucky that he had tried so hard to leave behind. But no matter how far he went, those pieces always seemed to follow him. He picked up a picture frame from the top of his dresser. It was a photo of him and his mother, taken last summer before he left for Ivy Ridge University. They were standing on the front porch of their old farmhouse, her arms wrapped around him, a warm smile on her face. His mom had always been his rock. No matter what the world said or how hard things got, she would always be there, telling him to keep pushing forward. He let out a soft sigh and placed the photo back. It wasn't easy, leaving the only life he knew, but he had to. He had dreams. He had goals. He wanted more than the quiet, predictable existence that everyone in his town seemed content with. He wanted to prove that someone from his background could make it in a world like this, could make it at Ivy Ridge. Jason had always been the kind of kid who studied hard, the kind who spent hours reading and learning. His friends from back home never understood his drive, and his family didn't have the resources to send him to college. But that never stopped him. His mother had scraped together enough money to get him into a state school for a year, and Jason had worked 2 part-time jobs to cover the rest of the expenses. That year, he had earned a scholarship to Ivy Ridge with his grades and determination. It was the one thing that made him feel like he had done something right in his life. But now, in this grand lecture hall, none of that seemed to matter. All his hard work, all his sacrifice, felt insignificant in the face of the ridicule he faced every day. The students here weren't like the kids back home. They came from families that had money and power, from a world that Jason had never known. And while his intellect had earned him a place at Ivy Ridge, his accent, his very identity, seemed to make him an outsider. But Jason wasn't the kind of person to back down. He had something to prove, and he wasn't going to let a group of snobs tear him down. Still, the sting of their mockery lingered. It was hard not to feel like he didn't belong. After all, his accent wasn't something he could change. It was a part of him, a part of where he came from. As Jason sat in his room, he found himself replaying the events of the day over and over in his mind. Emily, Brian, and Sophie's cruel words echoed in his ears. They didn't just mock his accent, they mocked his very existence. How could they be so cruel? Jason thought, the frustration bubbling up inside him. Why do they think they're better than me just because they speak differently? He stood up abruptly, walking over to the small window by his desk and looking out at the campus. It was a beautiful place, full of opportunity and promise. He could see the lush green lawns, the ivy-covered buildings, the students walking to and fro, lost in their own world. He wasn't part of that world, not yet. But he would be. He had to be. Jason's mind wandered back to his mother's words, the ones she had said to him before he left. Jason, no matter where you go or how far you travel, remember this, your roots will always be with you. Don't let anyone make you feel less than you are. Her words rang true, and in that moment, Jason knew he had to keep moving forward. He wasn't going to let the way he spoke, his accent, define him. He wasn't going to let it stop him from achieving his dreams. But how? How could he prove himself in a place where everyone already thought he was beneath them? Jason sank back into his chair and pulled his laptop toward him. He needed to study. He needed to bury himself in his work, to escape the sting of the taunts. As he opened his textbooks and began to review the lecture notes, his mind started to focus again. Philosophy. Logic. Ethics. These were his strengths. These were the things that made him unique. He opened a new tab and started searching for more advanced material, topics that his class hadn't even touched yet. His brain craved knowledge. It craved the challenge of learning, of proving that his intellect was more than enough to take him as far as he wanted to go. This was the only thing that had ever mattered to him. This was where he could show the world that he belonged. For hours, Jason buried himself in his studies. The world outside his dorm room faded away. The cruel whispers and mocking laughs were replaced by the calm rhythm of his thoughts, the steady progression of knowledge. His mind raced as he devoured new information, working through complex ideas and theories with ease. In the early morning hours, Jason finally closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair, exhausted but satisfied. He hadn't let the teasing get to him, not this time. He had a plan now. A way to prove them wrong. He would let his intellect do the talking. He would show them that no amount of mockery could ever take away his brilliance. Jason smiled to himself as he stood up, ready to face another day. The first round had been theirs, but this war was far from over. Tomorrow would be different. The morning sun filtered through the windows of the lecture hall, casting a golden glow over the rows of polished desks. Jason sat at the back of the room, as usual, his notes spread out in front of him. The philosophy class was about to begin, and he had made a point to keep his head down, to blend into the background. He wasn't here for popularity or attention, he was here to prove something to himself. But as the door opened, and the class began to settle, Jason knew it wouldn't be easy. Emily, Brian, and Sophie entered together, as they usually did. The trio always walked with the air of superiority, their laughter loud and carefree, a stark contrast to the silence Jason had adopted as his armor. He could feel their eyes on him as they passed, their glances not so subtle as they exchanged quiet snickers. "Still here, Carter?" Emily said, her voice laced with mock surprise, though she didn't look in his direction as she sat in the row in front of him. Her words, like a dart, struck Jason even before he could make sense of them. He had expected this, the quiet mocking, the whispered jokes. But today, it felt sharper. The tension in the air was undeniable, thicker than usual. Jason wasn't sure if it was the fact that he had become a target for ridicule or if they were simply bored and in need of someone to put down. Either way, their attention was fixed on him once again. The professor, Dr. Hargrove, stepped to the front of the class, his voice cutting through the murmur of the students. "All right, class, today we'll be discussing the philosophy of Kant. I hope you've all done your readings," he said, scanning the room. "But we're going to do this a little differently today. Instead of me lecturing, we're going to have a debate. I want you to argue the concepts from Critique of Pure Reason, whether or not the mind structures our experience of the world. But I'm not choosing the teams. I'm going to let you decide who you want to pair up with. Jason's stomach tightened. He wasn't much for public speaking, especially in a room full of people who already didn't respect him. Still, he had read the material, every word, every page. His mind was sharp, and he had studied Kant's ideas with a passion, even though no one in his small town had ever even heard of the philosopher. But despite the burning knowledge inside him, he wasn't sure how to handle being in a situation where his very identity seemed to be the subject of scrutiny. As students began to shuffle and choose their partners, Jason remained frozen, watching as Emily, Brian, and Sophie quickly paired off, exchanging looks that made him feel even more isolated. They didn't even bother to glance in his direction. Jason sighed and slowly gathered his books, preparing to partner with himself for this debate, if that was what it came to. But just as Jason was about to settle for being alone, a voice interrupted his thoughts. "Hey, Carter, you're with me." Jason turned to see a tall, lanky student with thick glasses, his hand extended. It was Max, a quieter, more reserved student who Jason had only spoken to a few times. He was the kind of student who didn't try to fit in with any group and seemed content to be left alone. Jason hesitated for a moment, then accepted the handshake. "Thanks, Max." Max smiled, but it wasn't a mocking smile, it was genuine. "Don't worry, man. We'll crush this debate. I've read Kant too. We'll be fine." For the first time in days, Jason felt a little lighter. At least Max was someone who didn't seem to care about his accent, his background, or any of the things that made him different. Max was different, too, and maybe that was why they could work together. It was a relief to have someone on his side. "All right," Dr. Hargrove said, clapping his hands together. "Let's get started. I'll give you 10 minutes to prepare. Once you've made your arguments, we'll start with the debate. Max, Jason, you're up first." Jason's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this, but he couldn't back down now. He nodded to Max, who had already started organizing his notes, and they began to discuss their approach. Jason's nerves started to settle as he spoke. Max wasn't fazed by the challenge, and soon they were deep into their analysis of Kant's philosophy. Jason found his focus, and the words flowed more easily than he expected. As the 10 minutes flew by, Jason started to feel a sense of power. This wasn't about his accent. This was about his knowledge. This was where he could shine, where his mind could prove that he deserved to be here, regardless of what anyone else thought. When it was their turn to present, Jason felt the familiar knot of anxiety rise in his chest, but he pushed it down. He wasn't going to let the laughter or the whispers get to him. Max started off the debate, explaining Kant's ideas with clarity and precision, and Jason followed with a well-organized argument. Their voices were calm and measured, and for once, Jason felt like he belonged. The class was surprisingly receptive to their ideas. Even Emily and Brian, who usually found ways to undermine anyone who didn't fit into their mold, looked intrigued. Jason's heart raced as he delivered his points, each one more confident than the last. It wasn't perfect, he knew he had a long way to go, but he could feel the tide beginning to shift. After the debate, the professor nodded in approval. "Well done, Max and Jason. You presented a solid argument. Class, let's move on." The rest of the class passed in a blur. Jason couldn't stop thinking about the way he had held his ground. Sure, it wasn't easy, and sure, Emily and Brian still shot him glances, but for the first time, he had stood tall. He had proven that he wasn't just some small-town kid with an accent, he was someone with a sharp mind and a perspective that mattered. When the bell rang and students started filing out, Max turned to Jason and offered a small, sincere smile. "You did great. Seriously. I knew you'd come through." Jason smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through him. Maybe this place wasn't as hostile as he had thought. Maybe there were people here who cared about more than just your social status or the way you spoke. As he walked out of the lecture hall, Jason's thoughts began to settle. He hadn't won over everyone, far from it. But he had taken the first step. He had made it clear that his accent wouldn't define him. His mind would. And that, he realized, was the most powerful thing he could ever bring to the table. Jason's heart still raced from the debate. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so alive in a classroom. It was as if a switch had been flipped in him. The sneers from earlier in the day, those taunts and smirks from Emily, Brian, and Sophie, no longer held the same weight. For the first time since arriving at Ivy Ridge, Jason felt like he wasn't just enduring his time here. He was starting to make it his own. As he walked across campus after class, Jason's mind kept replaying Max's words, "You did great. Seriously. I knew you'd come through." Max was the kind of person who didn't need to say much, but when he did, it felt like something worth hearing. Jason hadn't expected much from him. He was quiet, often seemed buried in his books, much like Jason. But there was something in Max's quiet confidence that had calmed Jason's nerves during the debate. It felt like he had found a small but solid connection in the chaos. Jason's steps slowed as he neared the student center. He was heading toward the cafe to grab a coffee when he spotted a group of students gathered in front of the bulletin board, laughing and chatting loudly. Among them were Emily, Brian, and Sophie. Jason wasn't in the mood for any more awkwardness, but as he was about to walk past, he caught a glimpse of Sophie's face. She looked frustrated, her brows furrowed, lips pursed as she stared down at something pinned to the bulletin board. Curiosity got the best of him, and before he could stop himself, Jason found himself standing at the edge of the group, peering over Sophie's shoulder. "What's going on?" Jason asked, his voice cautious but not afraid. Sophie jumped slightly, clearly startled. She turned to him with a sharp look but didn't immediately say anything. The other students fell silent as well, all eyes turning toward him. Jason could feel his heart skip a beat. It was like all the air had been sucked out of the space. Then Sophie's eyes softened, just for a second, before she spoke. "It's a campus talent show," she explained coolly. "It's supposed to be for fun, but knowing this place, it'll probably be a competition." Jason's gaze shifted from Sophie to the flyer on the bulletin board. It was decorated with bright colors, announcing the Ivy Ridge Talent Extravaganza. The event would be held in a couple of weeks, and the winner would receive a hefty prize. But the words that caught his attention weren't the flashy details or the cash prize, it was the line underneath, "Sign up now for your chance to perform or showcase your talent." Jason's mind began to spin. He had always been a private person, never one to seek the spotlight. But something about the idea of this event, the chance to prove himself in a different way, struck a chord deep within him. He wasn't sure what it would be yet, but he knew he couldn't let this chance pass by. As he stood there, lost in thought, Brian nudged Emily, who raised an eyebrow. "What's he thinking?" Emily muttered just loud enough for Jason to hear. "Does he even have a talent? Other than making us all laugh?" Jason's chest tightened, but he fought to keep his cool. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, turning toward her. "Come on, Carter," Brian snorted. "You don't exactly scream talent show material, you know." Jason could feel the familiar sting of their words, but instead of snapping back, something inside him clicked. He wasn't going to let them get under his skin, not today. He forced a smile, looking at the flyer once more. "Guess I'll just have to surprise you then," he said, his voice steady. The group exchanged puzzled looks, unsure how to respond. Jason could see their confusion, and it fueled something within him. Maybe this wasn't the grand gesture of defiance, but it was a step. He wasn't going to back down. He wasn't going to let their petty judgments decide what he was capable of. Without waiting for a response, Jason turned away and headed toward the cafe. His heart pounded in his chest, not from fear, but from a strange excitement he hadn't felt in a long time. He didn't know what he would do for the talent show, but it was time to find out. That evening, Jason sat alone in his dorm room, staring at the blank screen of his laptop. The words, "talent show," floated in his mind. What was he going to do? What talent could he showcase that would not only silence the mocking but also prove to himself that he belonged here? He had always been good at solving problems, thinking outside the box, skills that had served him well in academics. But could that translate into something for a talent show? He didn't play an instrument, he didn't sing, and he certainly didn't dance. But then, as the minutes ticked by, a thought began to form. He wasn't just a problem solver in a textbook sense. He could break down a problem, understand the intricacies, and put it back together in a way no one else could. Maybe he didn't need to fit into a mold. Maybe he just needed to do what he did best, think. What if he could create something entirely unexpected? Something that could blow people's minds, not with the usual talents they were expecting, but with a sharpness, a wit, a puzzle that no one could predict. Jason smiled to himself. He didn't need to be like everyone else. He just needed to be himself, and his mind was his greatest weapon. The next morning, Jason arrived at the student center early, eager to sign up for the talent show. He wasn't sure what the next few weeks would bring, but for the first time, he felt a surge of excitement about the challenge ahead. When he reached the sign-up sheet, he hesitated for a moment. His hand hovered over the page, unsure of what to put. Then, in a burst of confidence, he wrote his name. Beneath it, he scribbled one word, unpredictable. As he walked away from the sign-up sheet, Jason couldn't help but smile. This was his chance, not just to prove something to the others, but to prove something to himself. He wasn't just the kid with the accent. He was a force to be reckoned with. The weeks leading up to the talent show were filled with a new sense of purpose for Jason. He wasn't sure exactly what he was going to do yet, but the thought of proving himself, of showing everyone that he wasn't just the kid with an accent and a quiet demeanor, filled him with determination. His resolve to break free from the box they had placed him in began to solidify every day. Walking through the halls of Ivy Ridge, Jason began to notice the subtle shifts in the way people looked at him. The mocking glances from Emily, Brian, and Sophie were still there, but now, they seemed a little less sharp, a little less assured. It was as if they were starting to wonder what Jason was capable of. Maybe they hadn't fully realized it yet, but Jason was about to make them see that he was more than just a quiet, awkward kid with a strange accent. The talent show sign-up sheet, which had seemed like just a passing thought a few weeks ago, now felt like a challenge. Jason had committed to it. He had put his name down, and now, he needed to make good on that commitment. He had a plan, well, not exactly a plan, but a collection of ideas that might just work. It was time to take his first real step into the unknown. One evening, Jason sat in his dorm room, his desk lamp casting a soft glow on a piece of paper in front of him. His computer was open, a few tabs with random inspiration running in the background, but his focus was elsewhere. He had decided that he didn't want to just perform, he wanted to surprise. What he had in mind was far from conventional. Jason's idea was simple but bold, a live problem-solving demonstration. He would take something seemingly impossible and break it down, showing how even the toughest problems could be solved with the right thinking. The idea wasn't just to show his intelligence, it was to show that his mind could turn chaos into clarity, something the people around him would never expect. He wasn't going to be just another student with a violin or a guitar. No, he was going to blow them away with something they'd never seen before. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at his door. Jason turned to see Max standing in the doorway, his glasses slightly askew and a concerned expression on his face. "You good?" Max asked. "You've been holed up in here for days." Jason smiled, leaning back in his chair. "Yeah, just, trying to figure something out. The talent show's coming up, and I'm not sure I'm ready." Max raised an eyebrow. "You? Not ready? If anyone's ready to impress, it's you. You've got something no one else here does, brains." Jason shrugged, though he appreciated the encouragement. Brains don't always win talent shows. Max sat on the edge of Jason's bed, pushing up his sleeves. True. But, if you've learned anything, it's that talent doesn't always look the way people expect. I'm sure whatever you're planning will be unlike anything anyone's seen before. Jason paused. Maybe Max was right. Maybe this was the moment to really step into who he was meant to be. Actually, Jason said, his voice steady but excited, I've got an idea. Something unconventional. I'm thinking I'll solve a problem, Liv. Like, something no one would ever expect. Max's eyes widened. That's genius, man. Seriously, no one's going to see that coming. Do you need help? Jason hesitated. It wasn't that he didn't want Max to be involved, it was just that the idea felt personal. He wasn't sure if he could trust anyone else with it yet. I think I've got it, Jason said, though the idea was still taking shape. But I'll let you know if I need a hand. Max nodded, as if he understood completely. You've got this, Jason. I'll be in the front row cheering you on, no matter what. The day of the talent show arrived faster than Jason expected. He could barely sleep the night before, his mind racing with what-ifs and doubts. But he kept reminding himself of why he was doing this. He wasn't doing it for the crowd, or for the applause. He was doing it for himself. He was proving to himself that he could stand tall, that he was more than what people thought of him. As he walked into the student center that evening, the atmosphere was buzzing with excitement. Posters were plastered around the room, and students were milling about, chatting excitedly. Jason could hear snippets of conversations about the usual performances, singers, dancers, magicians, and even a student who could juggle flaming torches. It was the kind of talent show that felt both exciting and predictable at the same time. Jason was nervous, but he pushed those feelings down. He had come this far. There was no turning back now. His name was called, and he walked onto the stage, his heart pounding in his chest. The spotlight felt blinding at first, but as he stood there, he reminded himself of why he was here. He wasn't here to be just another face in the crowd. He was here to challenge the status quo, to do something that no one could have predicted. Taking a deep breath, he began. Good evening, everyone. My name's Jason Carter, and today, I'm going to show you something that I believe is one of the most powerful talents of all, problem solving. The crowd shifted, confused murmurs spreading. Jason could hear a few people laughing, others whispering to each other. He smiled to himself. This was it, the beginning of something new. I'm going to show you something that may seem impossible, but by the end of this, you'll see how even the most difficult challenges can be broken down and solved. He paused, letting the tension build. What I have in front of me is a puzzle. A riddle, if you will. And I'm going to solve it right here, right now. Jason pulled out a large, intricately designed puzzle from his bag, a complex series of interconnected locks, gears, and levers. It looked like something out of a science fiction movie. It was the perfect object for what he wanted to do. He set it down on the table in front of him, the audience staring in silence. As Jason started to work, his fingers moving with precision, he could feel their eyes on him. He wasn't just solving a puzzle, he was unraveling a mystery before their very eyes. Minute by minute, the puzzle started to take shape. Jason's mind was focused, and the crowd began to shift from confusion to intrigue. They were no longer laughing or whispering, they were watching, captivated by the unfolding process. And then, finally, with a soft click, the last piece fell into place. The puzzle was solved. The room erupted in applause. Jason stood tall, his chest swelling with pride. He hadn't just solved the puzzle. He had solved the problem they all had. They underestimated him. They had laughed at his accent, his background, his quietness. But today, he had shown them that he was more than they ever imagined. As the applause died down, Jason stepped back and smiled to himself. This was just the beginning. The talent show had been the first step, but he knew there were greater challenges ahead. And he was ready. After the talent show, Ivy Ridge felt different for Jason. It was as if the world had shifted around him, or perhaps, he had shifted within it. The way people looked at him had changed, and not just the ones who had doubted him. It wasn't just Emily, Brian, or Sophie, there were others too, the quieter students who had always hung in the background, and even the teachers who now seemed to take a closer look at him. The walls he had carefully built around himself, the ones that had kept him invisible, were slowly crumbling. Jason's phone buzzed on his desk as he sat in his dorm room the day after the talent show. He reached over, picking it up, and saw a message from Max. "Dude, that was amazing. Everyone's talking about it. You're a legend. Let's grab lunch tomorrow, I need to hear more about your genius plan." Jason smiled to himself. Max's words felt like a badge of honor, even if he hadn't done it for the praise. But still, a part of him couldn't help but enjoy the attention, especially because it felt deserved. He had worked hard for this moment, and the talent show had given him a chance to shine in a way that he had never allowed himself to before. He walked to class that morning with a renewed sense of purpose, his head held higher than usual. He felt eyes on him, curious, admiring eyes. Even if the spotlight made him uncomfortable at times, he couldn't deny that it was invigorating. He was no longer that quiet guy in the back of the room. Now, he was Jason Carter, the kid who had stunned the Ivy Ridge students with his unexpected genius. When he walked into his first class of the day, he was greeted by an unusual sight. Emily, Brian, and Sophie were all gathered around his desk, talking animatedly. For a moment, Jason hesitated. Was this going to be one of those awkward confrontations where they would tease him? He wasn't sure if he was ready for more of their sarcasm. But instead of mocking him, they smiled as he approached. "Carter, you were incredible last night," Brian said with a grin. "I mean, I didn't think you had it in you, but that puzzle thing was insane. I didn't even know what to think when you started." Jason blinked in surprise. Brian, the guy who had always been quick to make fun of him, was complimenting him. Sophie nodded, her usual smirk replaced with something more genuine. "Seriously. I've never seen anything like it. You're not what I expected, and that's not a bad thing." Emily looked at him for a moment, as if searching for a reaction. "I'm sorry," she said, almost hesitantly. "I judged you too soon." That was impressive. Jason felt a strange warmth flood through him. It wasn't the validation he had been seeking, but it was a recognition that he didn't expect. They weren't just acknowledging his performance, they were acknowledging him. "Thanks," Jason said, managing a small smile. "I guess you never really know what someone's capable of until they show you." Max walked in just then, catching the tail end of the conversation. "Carter, you're a rock star now. Everyone's still talking about it." He nodded toward the group of students. "And I see you're making friends with the elites now, huh?" Jason chuckled, shaking his head. "I wouldn't go that far. But I guess it's nice to finally be seen." The group exchanged a glance, and then Brian spoke again, his voice a little more subdued. "Hey, seriously. If you ever need a team for anything, let us know. You've got something we don't." Jason raised an eyebrow. "Something you don't?" Brian grinned. "That. Whatever that was. The way you think. It's impressive. I don't know anyone who could pull that off." Jason's heart lifted, but instead of feeling proud in a cocky way, he felt humbled. It wasn't that he didn't believe in his own abilities, it was that he had never allowed others to see him like this. In a way, the talent show had shattered his own walls as much as it had shattered theirs. The conversation shifted as the professor entered the classroom, but Jason's mind kept wandering back to what had just happened. In a world that had always expected him to be the underdog, he had not only stepped into the light, he had stolen the show. And in doing so, he had unlocked something within himself that he hadn't known was there. Later that day, Jason found himself walking to the campus library. He needed to clear his head and process everything. The newfound attention was both thrilling and overwhelming. He'd gone from being invisible to being someone people actually noticed. It felt strange, like he was navigating a whole new version of reality. As he walked past the usual groups of students lounging on the quad, Jason was stopped by a voice he hadn't expected to hear. "Jason, wait up." He turned to see Sophie jogging toward him. She was holding a coffee cup in her hand and had a soft smile on her face. For the first time since meeting her, Sophie seemed different. Not as aloof. More grounded. "What's up?" Jason asked, trying to keep the conversation casual, though he couldn't help but be curious. "I just wanted to say," she started, hesitating a little, "you really changed things for yourself, didn't you?" Jason blinked. "What do you mean?" "Before the show," she said, a thoughtful look in her eyes, "people didn't really pay attention to you. Or at least, they didn't take you seriously. But after last night, they're looking at you differently. And honestly, I think you might just be the smartest person on this campus." Jason felt his cheeks flush slightly. He had never been one to enjoy praise, but there was something different about Sophie's words. They weren't just about the performance, they were about him, the person behind the puzzle. "I don't know about that," he said modestly. "I just did what I know. It's not that big of a deal." Sophie tilted her head. "No, it is. You've got this whole world of potential, Jason. And now, people see it. You see it, too, don't you?" Jason paused, then nodded. He did see it. He didn't know where this journey would take him, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid. In fact, he was excited. The spotlight wasn't as scary as he thought. In fact, it might just be the place where he could finally shine. That evening, as Jason sat in his dorm room, preparing for his next set of assignments, he couldn't help but smile to himself. Ivy Ridge, which had once felt like an insurmountable mountain, now seemed like a place full of endless possibilities. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was thriving. And this was just the beginning. The buzz around Jason didn't fade after the talent show, in fact, it only grew louder. By the end of the week, Jason had become a kind of local legend at Ivy Ridge. His name was on everyone's lips, and his quiet intelligence had become a topic of whispered admiration. But, as with all things in high school, fame was a double-edged sword. Jason was used to blending in, to being the quiet observer rather than the center of attention. But now, people were looking at him in a different way. Some were curious, others were skeptical, and a few, like Emily, Brian, and Sophie, were surprisingly respectful. One afternoon, as Jason was walking to the library, his phone buzzed again. It was a message from Max. "Yo, dude, something big's coming. I heard the council is making a move on you. You better brace yourself." Jason raised an eyebrow, a sense of unease settling in his chest. What could the student council want with him? He had been avoiding their usual high-profile events, preferring to keep to his studies and his newfound love for problem-solving. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something that would push him out of his comfort zone again. As he walked into the library, Jason spotted a familiar face across the room. It was Emily, but this time she wasn't with Brian or Sophie. She was sitting alone at a table, her usual confident demeanor replaced with a more serious expression. She looked up as Jason approached and gave him a small nod. "Hey, Carter. Got a minute?" she asked, her voice casual but with an undertone of something more urgent. Jason hesitated for a second, but curiosity got the better of him. "Sure, what's up?" Emily motioned for him to sit down. "It's about the student council. They've been keeping an eye on you since the talent show. They're impressed, but I don't think they know exactly what to make of you yet." Jason felt a knot form in his stomach. "What do you mean?" She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "They want to see what you're really made of. And by they, I mean a group of students at the top. They've been challenging each other with these ridiculous competitions for a while. And I think they want you in on it. Jason frowned. Wait, you mean like some kind of challenge? What kind of challenge? Emily looked around quickly, making sure no one else was listening. It's not just any challenge. The student council, the popular crowd, they've been making a habit of outdoing each other with these intellectual duels. But they want a fresh face. Someone who isn't afraid to take risks. And from what I've heard, you're exactly what they're looking for. Jason felt a wave of unease wash over him. He had never been one for drama or competition. But the idea that these top students, the ones who always seemed untouchable, were seeking him out was both unsettling and strangely exciting. Are you saying they want me to join them? He asked cautiously. Emily shrugged. Not exactly. They want you to compete. To prove yourself. You've already shocked them once, but this will be different. They're not going to let you off easy. They want to see if you can stand up to the pressure. Jason took a deep breath. The idea of being thrust into a competition with the very people who had once mocked him was a little overwhelming, but the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. This was his chance to show them once and for all that he was more than just the kid with an accent. He could outsmart them. He could outthink them. And if he did, he'd earn their respect, not because he played their game, but because he rewrote the rules. When Jason didn't respond immediately, Emily continued, Look, I'm not saying you have to do it. But I know what you're capable of. And if you decide to play their game, you'll be stepping into a whole new world at Ivy Ridge. Trust me, you'll have more opportunities than you could imagine. Jason's mind was racing. The idea of facing the top students, of stepping into a realm of intellect and competition that he had never truly wanted to enter, was intimidating. But it was also tempting. It was a chance to prove that he didn't just belong at Ivy Ridge but could thrive there, no matter what they expected from him. Okay, Jason said, finally making up his mind. I'll do it. But on my terms. Emily smiled, her eyes glinting with approval. That's the spirit. I knew you'd get it. The challenge starts tomorrow, in the auditorium. You'll get the details when you get there. Just be prepared. They're not going to make it easy on you. The next day, Jason walked to the auditorium, his heart pounding in his chest. His mind was still spinning from the conversation with Emily. This wasn't going to be like anything he'd ever experienced before. As he entered the auditorium, he found a group of students already gathered. They were the usual crowd, the top tier of Ivy Ridge. The ones who always had their names in the spotlight, whether it was for academic achievements or extracurricular dominance. Jason felt a surge of nervousness, but he pushed it down. He had a plan. He wasn't going to let them intimidate him. At the front of the room stood none other than Brian, his arms crossed and a smirk on his face. Beside him was Sophie, who looked unusually serious for once. The rest of the group consisted of a few more familiar faces, students who were known for their academic prowess and social influence. Brian stepped forward, his voice carrying across the room. All right, Carter, you're here. Let's see if you can handle this. Welcome to the Ivy Ridge Intellectual Challenge. Jason stood tall, meeting Brian's gaze. I'm ready. The challenge began immediately. The rules were simple. They would present a series of complex problems, math puzzles, logic questions, and abstract challenges. The goal wasn't to answer them quickly, it was to answer them correctly and with creativity. Jason wasn't just solving problems now, he was proving something about himself. And he wasn't about to let anyone underestimate him again. As the problems were presented, Jason felt a calm settle over him. This was his domain, his chance to show them that intelligence wasn't just about following the rules, it was about thinking outside the box. Problem by problem, Jason dismantled their challenges with a level of precision and creativity that no one had expected. After the final problem was presented, Jason stood up, his mind buzzing with satisfaction. He had done it. He had proven that he was more than just the quiet kid with the accent. He was Jason Carter, and he had just outsmarted the best of Ivy Ridge. Brian looked at him, his smirk now replaced with a look of reluctant respect. "You're not just some fluke, Carter. You've got real skills." Jason smiled, his confidence now unshakable. "I told you. I don't play by the same rules." Jason's victory in the Ivy Ridge Intellectual Challenge had not only solidified his place in the school's elite circle but had also made him a subject of fascination. People who had once barely noticed him now couldn't stop talking about him. It was the kind of attention he had never craved, yet it was impossible to ignore. Wherever he went, there were whispers, some respectful, some envious, some outright hostile. But one thing was clear: Jason Carter had become a force to be reckoned with. The next few days were a blur of new experiences. Jason had been invited to more academic discussions, offered mentorship by professors, and even received a few private invitations from the student council to meet with them for potential leadership roles. His quiet, reserved life was rapidly shifting into something far more public, and for the first time, Jason wasn't sure how he felt about it. He had always been the type to keep his head down, focused on his studies and avoiding unnecessary attention. But now, he was a student at the very center of Ivy Ridge's intellectual and social scene. Everyone seemed to want something from him. They wanted his insight, his ideas, his time. And it was exhausting. As Jason walked through campus one afternoon, heading to the library for some much-needed peace and quiet, he was stopped once again. This time, it was Sophie, her eyes glinting with something between curiosity and concern. "Hey, Carter, can we talk?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. Jason raised an eyebrow, his mind still buzzing from the whirlwind of the past few days. "Sure, what's going on?" Sophie hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I wanted to say, I admire what you've done. You really shook things up. But you need to be careful. These people, they're not all like you. They want something from you. And they're not afraid to take it." Jason frowned. "What do you mean?" "I've just been doing my thing. People are, they're just interested." Sophie shook her head. "No, it's more than that. They see you as a threat now. And when you're a threat, people will try to take you down. The student council, the popular crowd, they don't like losing control. And if they think you're challenging that, they won't hesitate to make you the enemy." Jason swallowed hard. The idea that his recent success could be seen as a threat hadn't crossed his mind. He had been focused on proving himself, on earning respect. But now, Sophie's words were starting to sink in. Ivy Ridge wasn't a place where success was always celebrated. Sometimes, it was a weapon to be wielded against you. "So, what should I do?" he asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Sophie looked at him, her expression softening. "Watch your back. Stay true to yourself, but be careful who you trust. Everyone's got an agenda here, even the ones who seem like they have your back. Don't let them manipulate you." Jason nodded slowly, absorbing her words. He had always known Ivy Ridge had its own set of politics, but he hadn't truly understood how cutthroat it could be until now. He had been living in a bubble of self-assurance, convinced that if he just kept proving his worth, everything would be fine. But now, he realized that success here came with its own set of dangers. Later that evening, as Jason sat in his dorm room, he couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get a lot more complicated. The student council had already taken notice of him, and the intellectual challenge had proven that he was a force to be reckoned with. But what would that mean for his future at Ivy Ridge? Was he prepared for the kind of pressure that came with being at the top? He stared out of the window, the campus lights twinkling below. He could hear the laughter of students outside, the sounds of social gatherings and celebrations. For the first time in a long while, Jason wondered if all of this was worth it. He had finally found a place where he could shine, but the more he succeeded, the more enemies he seemed to make. And he wasn't sure if the spotlight he had stepped into was the kind of place he wanted to stay. The next day, Jason was once again called into a meeting with the student council. This time, however, it felt different. The atmosphere in the room was charged with a kind of unspoken tension. The council president, a charismatic and influential student named Alex Wright, stood at the front, flanked by several other council members. "Jason, thank you for joining us," Alex said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We've been very impressed with your performance in the challenge. You've certainly proven yourself to be a valuable asset to Ivy Ridge. And we think you can contribute even more to our school's legacy." Jason sat up straighter, his mind already on high alert. He had heard enough about Alex and the council to know that their compliments usually came with strings attached. "We'd like to extend an offer to you, Jason," Alex continued, his tone smooth but with a hint of something calculating. "We're organizing a special event, an academic symposium, and we'd love for you to take the lead in the problem-solving section. We think your unique perspective would be invaluable." Jason felt a wave of unease. He had no interest in becoming a figurehead for their agenda. "I appreciate the offer," he said cautiously, "but I'm not sure I want to be involved in another high-profile event right now." Alex's smile faltered, but he quickly regained his composure. "I understand your reservations, but this isn't just any event. This could be your chance to cement your place in the school's history. Think about it, Jason. This is a rare opportunity to show everyone what you're truly capable of. We know you've got the potential to lead, and we want to help you unlock it." Jason was quiet for a moment, weighing his options. On one hand, the offer was tempting. Leading an academic symposium would give him a chance to showcase his skills on an even larger platform. But on the other hand, he knew what kind of world he was stepping into. The student council wasn't interested in helping him for the sake of his growth, they were interested in using him to further their own power. "I'll think about it," Jason said, his voice steady but firm. "But I'm not making any promises." Alex's smile returned, though this time it seemed more calculated. "Of course. We'll give you some time to consider. But remember, Jason, opportunities like this don't come around often. You won't want to miss out." As Jason left the meeting, he felt the weight of their words hanging in the air. He had been given a chance to prove himself, to step further into the world of Ivy Ridge's elite. But at what cost? What would he have to sacrifice to maintain his place at the top? And more importantly, was it worth it? That evening, as Jason lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the question lingered in his mind. He had fought for respect, for recognition. But now, he wondered if the success he had earned was leading him down a path he wasn't ready to follow. The next few weeks would test him in ways he couldn't yet predict. He had proven his intellect, earned the respect of his peers, and become a player in Ivy Ridge's high-stakes game. But the price of success was never as clear as it seemed. And Jason Carter was about to learn that the higher you rise, the harder you fall. Jason stood on the edge of a precipice. The weight of the student council's offer felt like a heavy stone lodged in his chest. On one side was a path of greater recognition, power, and opportunity, leading to further immersion in the elite world of Ivy Ridge. On the other was the uncomfortable reality that all this success, all this attention, came at a price he wasn't sure he was willing to pay. The next morning, Jason found himself in a familiar setting, the library. The place where he had always sought refuge from the noise of the outside world, the place where he had found solace in his books, in his thoughts, away from the chaos of social interactions. But today, even the quiet hum of students around him couldn't calm his racing thoughts. As he sat in one of the far corners, buried in a stack of textbooks, his phone buzzed again. A message from Max. "I heard they're pushing you hard. You've got to make a decision soon, man. They won't wait forever." Jason stared at the message for a moment. He hadn't spoken to Max in a few days, but the reminder of the pressure weighing on him felt like a bucket of cold water. He had always been the type to let his mind work through problems on his own, but now, it seemed like the weight of everyone's expectations was suffocating him. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice. "Mind if I join you?" Jason looked up to see Emily standing there, a slight smile on her face, holding a cup of coffee. She'd been quieter lately, but Jason couldn't deny the bond that had started to form between them since the intellectual challenge. He gestured for her to sit. "Sure. You're looking unusually serious today," Emily said, sitting down across from him and setting her coffee cup down on the table. "You've got that look, the one where you're clearly solving some deep, existential problem." Jason chuckled dryly, though there was little humor in it. "Yeah, I guess you could say that. It's just, all this attention. All this pressure." Emily nodded knowingly. "I get it. You've been thrust into the spotlight, and it feels like everyone wants a piece of you. I saw it happen to other students, those who were once underdogs, only to rise up and find themselves in situations where they had to compromise who they were just to stay on top." Jason looked down at his hands, gripping the edges of the table. "It's not even that. It's the fact that I'm being pushed into these situations. The student council wants me to lead their academic symposium. They say it's a huge opportunity, but I can't help but feel like it's just another way for them to use me to further their own agenda. I don't know what they want from me, and frankly, I'm scared that if I say yes, I'll lose myself in the process." Emily took a slow sip of her coffee, her expression thoughtful. "I think you're smart enough to navigate this, Jason. But that doesn't mean it won't be hard. You're right, those people in the council, they have their own motivations. But that doesn't mean you have to play their game by their rules. You're not their puppet. You've already proven that you can outsmart them, outthink them. This is your chance to take control of the situation, to use the power they're giving you to your advantage." Jason glanced up at her, his heart pounding with the realization of what she was saying. She wasn't asking him to play their game, she was encouraging him to flip the board and make it his own. To take the power back. But there was still something gnawing at him, something he couldn't quite shake off. He had always been the quiet one, the observer. The idea of stepping into the leadership role they were offering him terrified him. What if he made the wrong move? What if he alienated the very people who respected him for being himself? "I don't know if I'm ready for all that," Jason admitted, his voice low. "I've always kept my distance from people like them. It's like, suddenly, I'm expected to be someone I'm not." Emily reached across the table, her hand lightly resting on his. "You don't have to change who you are, Jason. You just need to take the next step in your journey. You've already come so far. Don't let fear hold you back now. You don't have to play by their rules. You're not some one-dimensional character in a high school drama. You're Jason Carter, the kid who flipped the script in that intellectual challenge and stunned everyone." Her words lingered in his mind. She was right, wasn't she? He didn't have to play their game. He could reshape it, turn it into something that worked for him. But that meant stepping into the role they had laid out for him. It meant embracing the kind of leadership that he had always shied away from, even if it meant taking risks. "I don't know," Jason said again, unsure. "Maybe I'll talk to Max. He might have some advice." Emily smiled gently, squeezing his hand. "Max is a good guy, but remember, this is your decision. Whatever you decide, just make sure it's what you want, not what they want from you." Jason let out a slow breath. "I'll think about it." "Thanks, Emily. I needed to hear that." As she stood up to leave, she looked over her shoulder with a grin. "I know you'll make the right choice. You always do." The next day, Jason found himself pacing back and forth in his dorm room, his phone in hand. He had put off making a decision for as long as he could, but the time had finally come. The student council had made it clear that they expected an answer, and every passing hour felt like a weight dragging him deeper into uncertainty. He typed out a message to Max. "I've been offered the leadership position for the symposium. They say it's a big deal, but I'm not sure I want to get tangled up in their game. What do you think?" Max's reply came almost instantly. "Look, man, you're smarter than this. They want you because they see something in you that they can't get anywhere else. You've got power now, Carter. And if you're smart, you'll use it to your advantage. Don't let them push you around. You've earned your spot. It's time to take control. Jason paused as he read Max's message. It was simple, but it struck a chord. He had earned this spot. He had fought for it. And now, it was time to take the reins. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Max. But remember, it's not about doing what they want, it's about doing what you want. You've got the potential to make things happen. Don't let anyone tell you who you should be. Jason felt a rush of clarity wash over him. It wasn't about pleasing the council or fitting into their mold. It was about proving to himself that he could be more than the quiet, reserved kid who had always been on the sidelines. He had the power now to reshape the narrative. And this time, he wouldn't let anyone tell him how the story should go. By the time the evening rolled around, Jason had made his decision. He was going to accept the offer, not because he wanted to impress the student council or prove them wrong, but because he was ready to take ownership of his future. It was time to show Ivy Ridge what Jason Carter was truly capable of, on his terms. He wasn't just going to play their game. He was going to win it, and rewrite the rules along the way. Jason had made his decision. The weight that had been sitting on his chest for days now felt like it had been lifted. It wasn't going to be easy. There were still so many unknowns about what was to come, but Jason wasn't going to let that stop him. He had earned his place at Ivy Ridge, he had earned the respect, the recognition, and now, it was time to stand tall in it. The night before he was supposed to meet with the student council to give his official response, Jason couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in his bed, the decision playing over and over in his mind. What if he made a mistake? What if accepting their offer only led to more manipulation, more power games? But he kept coming back to the same conclusion. He had the power now. This was his moment, his chance to prove that he wasn't just a bystander in his own story. As dawn broke, Jason's phone buzzed. It was a message from Sophie, the one person whose opinion he still held close. I heard you're considering their offer. Don't let them pull you in too deep. Remember, play your own game, not theirs. Jason smiled. Sophie had always had a way of grounding him, of reminding him to stay true to himself. The council could offer him prestige, opportunities, and influence, but they couldn't offer him his integrity. That was his to protect, no matter what. He sat up, stretched, and took a deep breath. This was it. The meeting was set for noon. Jason walked through the ivy-covered halls of Ivy Ridge, feeling the familiar weight of the campus on his shoulders. But this time, it felt different. There was a certain quiet confidence in his step, a surety that he hadn't felt before. He wasn't walking into the meeting as the kid from the outskirts, the one they'd once dismissed. No, today he was walking in as someone who had earned the right to be there, who had earned the right to decide his own path. When he entered the student council's conference room, Alex Wright was already there, along with the rest of the council members, all sitting at the long, polished table. The atmosphere was as intimidating as ever, but Jason stood tall. Jason, glad you could join us, Alex said, flashing his usual smile. I trust you've had time to think over our offer. Jason nodded, his gaze steady. Yes, I've thought about it, he said, his voice firm. And I've decided to accept the leadership role for the symposium. There was a brief silence. For a moment, Jason couldn't tell if anyone was surprised by his response, but then Alex's smile widened. Excellent, Alex said, leaning back in his chair. We knew you would come around. You've got great potential, Jason. We've been following your work closely, and we believe you'll be an incredible asset to the symposium. Jason's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't let his nerves show. He had made his choice, and now he had to take control of the situation. I'm looking forward to it, Jason said, but his mind was already shifting into a different gear. But I have a few ideas of my own about how we should approach the symposium. If we're going to make it something truly unique, it's important that we approach it differently. We can't just go through the motions and do what's been done before. Alex raised an eyebrow, his smile still in place but now tinged with something closer to curiosity. Different, you say? Well, we're open to ideas, Jason. What do you have in mind? Jason took a breath. This was his moment to step up, to show them that he wasn't just a pawn in their game. He had something to offer, his own vision, his own style. He wasn't going to let them dictate the narrative anymore. I want to structure the symposium around real-world problem-solving, not just theoretical ideas. Let's bring in people who can challenge our thinking, who can show us how knowledge can be applied outside of this school. I want to make it something that truly pushes the boundaries of what we think we know. There was a murmur of surprise around the table. Jason could feel the shift in the room, the subtle tension rising. The council members exchanged looks, unsure how to react. But Alex, ever the politician, was quick to recover. Interesting approach, he said, tapping his fingers on the table. But this kind of shift would require us to rethink the entire structure of the event. Are you sure you're up for that kind of challenge? Jason leaned forward, his gaze unflinching. I'm sure. And I'm not just doing it for the symposium. I'm doing it for the people here. For all of us who are tired of the same old ways of doing things. This is about more than just impressing the faculty or gaining prestige. This is about making an impact. For a moment, the room was silent. Jason could feel the weight of their eyes on him. He knew he was taking a risk, but it felt right. This was the first time he'd truly felt in control of his future at Ivy Ridge. Alex's smile returned, though it was more guarded now. Very well, he said, we'll let you take the reins on this one, Jason. But remember, the success of this event reflects on all of us. Don't let it slip through your fingers. Jason nodded, a sense of determination settling over him. I won't. The next few weeks were a blur of planning, organizing, and, at times, pushing back against the norms that the council had expected. Jason was often in meetings with various students, professors, alumni, and even outside speakers, ensuring that the symposium would not be a conventional event. He found himself more and more in his element, challenging ideas, thinking outside the box, and inspiring others to do the same. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when the student council's expectations clashed with his vision. But Jason had learned to stand his ground. Every time they pushed back, he reminded them why he had taken on this challenge in the first place, to prove that success wasn't about following orders, but about making your own way. The day of the symposium finally arrived. The grand hall was filled with students, professors, and guests from all over the world. Jason walked in, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. It had all come down to this. He had worked tirelessly to ensure that the event would reflect his vision, and now, it was time to see it through. As the event began, Jason took his place at the front, watching as the speakers took the stage, presenting ideas that challenged conventional wisdom. The room was alive with energy, with people eager to engage in debates, to rethink their assumptions, and to learn from one another. But the true moment of triumph came when Jason took the stage himself, presenting his final address. He talked about the importance of questioning everything, about the value of pushing boundaries, and about the responsibility each person had to make an impact in the world. When he finished, the room erupted into applause. Jason had done it. He had not only proven that he could lead, but he had redefined what leadership meant at Ivy Ridge. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The applause from the symposium's conclusion echoed in Jason's mind long after the event had ended. It had been a success, more than a success, it had been a revelation. Jason had stood up in front of Ivy Ridge's elite, challenging their expectations, and not only met them but surpassed them. The students who had once scoffed at his accent and dismissed him as a nobody were now looking at him with a mix of awe and respect. But with success came new challenges. Jason felt the weight of responsibility settling in, heavier than it had been before. He wasn't just a student anymore, he was a leader. And with that leadership came the pressure to continue excelling, to continue proving himself worthy of the position he had earned. The weeks following the symposium passed in a whirlwind of meetings, strategy sessions, and emails. Jason found himself constantly surrounded by members of the student council, faculty, and even prominent alumni. They were all eager to connect with him now, to offer support or, at times, try to sway his decisions. But Jason remained focused on what mattered, staying true to his vision. One afternoon, as he sat in a cafe just off campus, reviewing notes for an upcoming council meeting, a familiar face appeared. It was Sophie, looking as calm and collected as ever, her long dark hair tucked into a sleek ponytail. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, her voice warm but her eyes sharp with curiosity. Jason gestured for her to sit, offering her the seat across from him. "Of course. What's up?" Sophie slid into the chair, glancing down at the papers scattered across the table. "You're a busy man these days," she said, raising an eyebrow. "Running Ivy Ridge, it looks like." Jason couldn't help but laugh at the exaggeration. "It certainly feels like it sometimes." Sophie's smile faded slightly, and she leaned in a little closer, her tone turning more serious. "I'm glad you took the position, Jason. I think you've really made a difference, but I have to ask, how are you holding up? All this pressure. I know it's not easy." Jason paused. The question caught him off guard, and for a moment, he felt vulnerable. He hadn't been open about the strain he was under. But Sophie had always been there for him, even when he didn't realize it. "I'm doing fine," he said, trying to brush it off. "I've learned a lot. But it's a lot, you know. Everyone has their hands in everything now. There's always someone else with an opinion, and sometimes I just want to step back and—" He stopped, realizing how much his words were revealing. Sophie nodded in understanding. "I get it. You don't have to carry it all alone. I can see how easy it would be to get caught up in trying to meet everyone else's expectations, but you're only human. You can't do it all." Jason smiled, though it felt a little forced. "I guess I just feel like if I don't do it, no one else will." Sophie's expression softened. "That's a heavy burden to carry, Jason. But you've proven that you're more than capable. Maybe it's time to start leaning on others more, to build a team that works with you, not just for you." Her words hit home. Jason had always been a bit of a lone wolf, preferring to figure things out on his own. But maybe it was time to change that. He had already made an impact on Ivy Ridge. But if he wanted to sustain that impact, he would need the support of others, people who shared his vision, people who would help carry the load. "You're right," he said slowly. "Maybe I've been trying to do too much myself. But it's hard to know who to trust, you know." Sophie smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "Trust isn't built overnight. But you've already shown you have the ability to bring people together. Use that." Jason leaned back in his chair, letting her words settle in. He had built the symposium from the ground up, but now, the next step was figuring out how to take it, and everything else he was doing, further. Later that week, Jason called a meeting with the members of the student council. He had spent the last few days reflecting on Sophie's advice, and he knew what he needed to do. It was time to start building a stronger team, one that could support him without just relying on him. He had to start trusting others if he was going to continue growing and making the kind of impact he wanted. When the council members filed into the meeting room, there was a quiet tension in the air. Jason had been making waves at Ivy Ridge for months now, but this was different. He wasn't going to sit back and let things happen. He was taking control. "Thank you all for coming," Jason said, his voice steady as he stood at the head of the table. "I know that we've had some great successes recently, but there's more work to be done. And I can't do it all myself. So, today, I want us to talk about how we can better collaborate, how we can build a team that supports one another." The room was silent for a moment as everyone exchanged glances. Jason could feel the uncertainty in the air. For months, he had been the one in the spotlight, the one who carried the burden of their expectations. But now, he was flipping the script. This was no longer just about him, it was about all of them, working together. "I've been pushing hard for a vision," Jason continued, "but I realized that the best way to make it a reality is by involving more people. We've got some incredible talent here. We need to tap into that." As he spoke, Jason saw the shift in the room. Some of the council members were nodding, clearly on board. Others seemed hesitant, uncertain. But Jason didn't let their doubts throw him off course. This was his chance to change the dynamics, to build a team that was truly invested in the future of Ivy Ridge, not just in their own personal gains. "You've all got strengths," Jason said, looking around the table. "And I want to use those strengths to take this school to new heights. I'm asking you to step up with me. To share the load. To challenge each other and work together. No more lone wolves." There was a long pause. Then, slowly, Alex spoke up, his voice thoughtful. "I've been skeptical about the direction you've been pushing, Jason. But I'll admit, what you've done with the symposium was impressive. If you think bringing the team together is the next step, then I'm willing to give it a shot." Jason smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. "Thank you, Alex. That's all I'm asking. Let's work together. Let's make Ivy Ridge the best it's ever been." In the following weeks, Jason began to implement his new approach. He delegated more responsibilities, brought in new perspectives, and made sure that every voice was heard. The work wasn't always easy, and there were moments of tension as people adjusted to the shift in dynamics. But slowly, a sense of unity began to take shape within the council. Jason had started with a single vision, but now, that vision was growing. It wasn't just his anymore. It was the vision of a team, a group of people who were willing to work together towards something greater than any one of them could achieve alone. And as Jason stood at the front of another meeting, looking around at the faces of his team, he knew one thing for certain: this was just the beginning. Jason's approach to leadership was changing, and Ivy Ridge was feeling it. The air had a different energy now. The student council was more connected, the debates more thoughtful, and the collaboration was beginning to shift from a concept to a reality. For the first time since his arrival, Jason felt like he wasn't just an outsider trying to fit in, but a central figure with the power to shape the future of this prestigious school. Yet, as much as things were improving, Jason knew he wasn't out of the woods yet. There was still a core group of students, the ones who thrived on power and control, who resented Jason's rise. Their smiles were thin, their handshakes cold. These were the students who saw him as a threat, who couldn't accept the idea of someone like him, someone who had started at the bottom, taking charge. And then there was Alex Wright. Jason had been grateful for Alex's willingness to give him a shot at leadership. But Jason wasn't naive. He knew Alex was a political player, and the political game at Ivy Ridge was never as straightforward as it seemed. Alex had welcomed Jason into the fold, but he hadn't fully embraced him. There was still an undercurrent of tension, and Jason could sense it. The next big challenge came when the annual Ivy Ridge Challenge was announced, a grueling test of leadership, strategy, and teamwork. The event was a school-wide competition that involved students from all disciplines, testing everything from academic knowledge to physical endurance. For the past few years, the event had been won by one of the elite student groups, and this year, it was Jason's turn to lead his team. This was the moment he had been waiting for. This was where he could prove that his new approach to leadership, the one based on collaboration, was the right path. But it wasn't going to be easy. There were some students who were determined to see Jason fail, to show that the outsider didn't belong. The day of the Ivy Ridge Challenge arrived, and Jason found himself pacing outside the campus arena, where the event would take place. He wasn't nervous in the traditional sense. He had spent weeks preparing his team, making sure each person had a role, a skill set, and the confidence to handle the pressure. But he could feel the weight of the challenge. If he failed now, all the progress he'd made, all the trust he'd built, would be shattered. His team gathered around him. Sophie was there, of course, standing next to him with that ever-reliable calm. There was David, the quiet but brilliant strategist, Rachel, the extroverted team motivator, and even Alex, who had reluctantly agreed to join the team. "You know what's at stake, right?" Jason said, addressing his team as they gathered in a circle. "This isn't just about winning. This is about showing Ivy Ridge that leadership is about collaboration, not just power. We've trained hard for this, and I know you all have what it takes. Trust each other, trust the process, and we'll succeed." Rachel grinned, cracking her knuckles. "We're ready. Let's show them what we can do." David nodded, his glasses reflecting the sunlight. "I've mapped out the strategy for each phase of the challenge. If we follow the plan and stay adaptable, we'll beat the competition." Jason looked at Alex. He had been quiet during the pep talk, and Jason couldn't read his expression. "You good?" Jason asked, his voice even but laced with a hint of challenge. Alex, who had always been the golden boy of Ivy Ridge, raised an eyebrow. "We'll see. Just don't let your collaboration get in the way of winning." The subtle jab stung, but Jason didn't react. He had a bigger goal in mind. "Let's go," Jason said, stepping forward. "We're in this together." The competition was grueling from the start. The first event was a high-stakes academic quiz, testing everything from scientific principles to historical events. Jason's team had studied for weeks, and it showed. They breezed through the first round, but as they moved into the more challenging portions, the pressure mounted. It was in the second round, a physical endurance challenge, that the tension within the team began to show. The course was designed to test both strength and teamwork, climbing walls, navigating obstacle courses, and performing complex team exercises that required not just physical prowess but communication and trust. Rachel was in her element. She powered through the obstacles, leading the way with energy and determination. David was analytical, calculating the best way to tackle each challenge, and Sophie offered a steady, encouraging presence, always knowing when to push and when to pull back. But Alex was different. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by frustration. He was frustrated with the slow pace of the team, frustrated that the strategies weren't working out as he had imagined. He pushed ahead, disregarding Jason's guidance and making quick, rash decisions that risked putting the entire team in danger. "Alex!" Jason called out as Alex tried to climb a particularly difficult wall, ignoring the team's carefully laid out plan. "Hold on. We need to work together on this." Alex turned, his face flushed with anger. "I don't need you telling me what to do, Jason. I know what I'm doing." The rest of the team paused, watching the confrontation. Jason felt his heart pound in his chest. He had seen Alex's competitive streak before, but this was different. Alex wasn't just challenging him, he was undermining the team's entire approach. For a moment, everything stood still. Jason took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of patience he had. "Alex," he said, his voice steady. "I know you're good. I know you want to win. But we need to work together. This isn't just about us individually, it's about the team." Alex stared at him for a long moment, his chest heaving from exertion. Then, unexpectedly, he sighed, his posture slumping slightly. "Fine," he muttered, his tone reluctant but resigned. "Let's do it your way." Jason nodded, a small victory in his chest. The challenge was far from over, but in that moment, he knew that his leadership wasn't just about winning, it was about the strength of his team, and they had just taken one step closer to truly becoming one. As the challenge progressed, Jason's leadership was tested again and again. Each round brought new obstacles, new strategies, and new moments of doubt. But with each challenge, the team grew stronger, more cohesive. Jason had proven that he wasn't just a leader by title, he was a leader who understood the power of collaboration, of listening to others, and of adapting when necessary. The final event was a culmination of everything they had learned, a massive obstacle course that required a combination of physical skill, strategy, and mental endurance. It was here that Jason would either cement his place as a true leader or see it all unravel. As they made their way through the final challenge, each team member gave it their all. There were moments of doubt, moments when Jason wasn't sure they would make it. But in the end, they did. They crossed the finish line together, exhausted but victorious. The crowd erupted into cheers as the team stood together, breathing heavily but smiling. Jason turned to look at his team, each one had stepped up in their own way. And together, they had overcome the odds. Jason's victory in the Ivy Ridge Challenge was celebrated across campus. His team's achievement was a testament to his ability to lead with collaboration, but it wasn't long before the whispers began. Some congratulated him openly, while others, particularly the students from the more powerful cliques, began to look for cracks in his success. They had seen Jason rise quickly, but the real test, they whispered, was whether he could handle the pressure that came with success. Though the spotlight on him was brighter than ever, Jason knew that the hardest challenges were yet to come. Winning the Ivy Ridge Challenge had solidified his position among his peers, but it had also made him a target. He had disrupted the status quo, and the established powers at Ivy Ridge weren't about to let that go without a fight. The days following the victory were a blur of congratulatory emails, alumni messages, and interviews with campus publications. Everyone wanted a piece of him, it seemed. Everyone had an opinion on what his next move should be. And that's when Jason started noticing something strange. It wasn't the public praise that made him uneasy, it was the private conversations, the ones that seemed to come from nowhere. Rumors. Suggestions. Offers of help that came with strings attached. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling meeting with the student council, Jason was walking back to his dorm when he was approached by a familiar face, Ethan Blackwell, one of Ivy Ridge's most powerful and influential students. Ethan was charismatic, wealthy, and well-connected, and he had always been a member of the elite crowd Jason had never quite belonged to. "Jason," Ethan said, flashing him a wide grin as he stepped in front of him. "Impressive work at the challenge. I have to admit, you surprised a lot of people. Including me." Jason paused, his instincts immediately on edge. Ethan was a master at playing the game of Ivy Ridge, and Jason had no intention of falling into whatever trap Ethan had in mind. "Thanks," Jason said evenly, trying to keep the conversation cordial. It was a team effort. Ethan's grin widened, but there was something cold about it. "Of course. But that's the thing, isn't it? It's all about the team, about the right people being in the right positions. You've got the charisma, Jason. You've got the brains. But you need the right connections to make it all work long-term." Jason raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly are you suggesting?" Ethan leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "I'm suggesting that we could help each other out. You're clearly making a name for yourself, and I admire that. But you can't expect to keep moving forward without a little assistance. I can offer you the right opportunities, the right people. All I'm asking for in return is that you remember who helped you." Jason felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard enough. The offer was clear, but Jason wasn't the kind of person who would owe anyone like Ethan anything. He had worked too hard to get where he was, and he wasn't going to sell out now. "I don't need anyone's help to succeed, Ethan," Jason said firmly. "I'm doing fine on my own." Ethan's smile faltered for just a second before he quickly recovered. "Well, it's your choice, of course. But just remember, Jason, Ivy Ridge is a game. And in this game, you don't make it to the top without allies." Jason didn't respond, simply nodding politely before turning on his heel and walking away. But his mind was racing. Ethan's words echoed in his ears. Ivy Ridge is a game. Was he right? Was this whole place just about power, alliances, and manipulation? Jason had built his reputation on doing things his own way, on relying on his intellect and his ability to bring people together. But as the pressure mounted, the temptation to play the game, to take shortcuts, began to creep in. Was he really prepared to fight every battle on his own, or would he have to make deals with people like Ethan to keep advancing? That evening, Jason sat alone in his dorm, staring at his phone screen. Sophie had sent him a text asking if they could meet up to discuss the next student council initiative. He had been so caught up in the whirlwind of the challenge that he hadn't thought much about the next step. But now, as he reflected on the conversation with Ethan, he realized that he had to be careful. This was bigger than just leading his team, it was about navigating the complex world of Ivy Ridge's elite. The knock on his door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Sophie, standing there with a casual smile, her dark eyes bright with curiosity. "Hey, thought we could grab dinner and talk strategy," she said, stepping inside. Jason gave a small smile, gesturing for her to sit. "I could use a break from all this madness, actually. But I need to talk to you about something." Sophie raised an eyebrow, sitting down across from him. "What's up?" Jason hesitated for a moment, unsure how to frame it. "I had a conversation today. With Ethan Blackwell." Sophie's expression darkened slightly, and she crossed her arms. "What did he want?" Jason sighed, leaning back in his chair. "The usual. He offered to help me, for a price. He said I can't keep moving forward without the right connections." Sophie's eyes narrowed. "Did you accept?" "No," Jason replied quickly. "But I'm starting to wonder if he's right. I mean, I've done everything my way so far, but maybe that's not enough anymore. Maybe I need to start playing the game." Sophie studied him for a long moment before speaking. "Jason, don't lose sight of who you are. You've built everything on your own strength, on being authentic. If you start making deals with people like Ethan, you're going to lose that. Ivy Ridge is full of people who play games, who manipulate. But you don't have to be like them. You've already proven that." Jason looked at her, and for the first time in days, he felt a sense of clarity. Sophie was right. He couldn't afford to let the pressure of Ivy Ridge's politics change him. The game was rigged, and no matter how much he wanted to fit in, he couldn't sacrifice his principles for power. "I don't need Ethan or anyone else to succeed," Jason said, his voice more certain than it had been in days. "I'm going to keep doing it my way." Sophie smiled, her expression softening. "Good. Keep being yourself, Jason. That's the one thing no one can take away from you." As the days went by, Jason found himself more resolute than ever. The temptation to fall into Ivy Ridge's politics was real, but he knew that if he wanted to truly lead, he had to stay true to the values that had gotten him this far. There would be more challenges ahead, more people like Ethan who would try to manipulate him. But Jason had learned something important: success wasn't just about making it to the top. It was about how you got there. And with that clarity, Jason was ready to face whatever Ivy Ridge threw at him next. Jason's resolve was firm. He wasn't going to let Ivy Ridge's games define him. Still, the political maneuvering that surrounded him seemed to grow more intense by the day. Even though he had rejected Ethan Blackwell's offer of alliance, the pressure was mounting. It wasn't just Ethan now, it was everyone. Students, faculty, even some alumni were keeping a close eye on him. He had made a name for himself, but as with all things at Ivy Ridge, fame came at a cost. The next day, Jason was summoned to a meeting with Mrs. Hawthorne, the Dean of Students. She had always been a formidable figure in the Ivy Ridge community, a woman who knew how to play both sides of the academic and social divide. She was known for being extremely well-connected, and for all her politeness, her requests were rarely just requests. They were demands wrapped in velvet. "Jason," Mrs. Hawthorne began, smiling as he entered her office. The room was adorned with prestigious awards and diplomas. It was an office that screamed power and influence. "I've been following your progress with great interest." Jason nodded, not sure where this was going. "Thank you, Mrs. Hawthorne. I'm just trying to do my best." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze piercing. "And you are. But you must understand that Ivy Ridge is a delicate balance. You've risen very quickly, and while that's commendable, some people may find it unsettling. Jason felt a tightening in his chest. I'm not here to cause trouble, he said carefully. I just want to do what's best for the school and its students. Mrs. Hawthorne's lips curled into a smile, but there was no warmth in it. Of course. But you must understand that when someone rises too quickly, it tends to unsettle the balance. And balance, Jason, is something we at Ivy Ridge hold dear. She paused for a moment, and Jason could tell there was more coming. He just didn't know how much more. What are you suggesting? He asked, keeping his tone neutral. She stared at him for a beat too long before answering. You've proven yourself in many ways, Jason. Your leadership in the Ivy Ridge Challenge was impressive, but now it's time for you to make your next move. And perhaps it's time for you to align yourself with the right people. Jason felt a flicker of anger. He could feel the subtle pressure in her words, the expectation that he would fall in line with the establishment. The invitation to play the game. I appreciate your advice, he said, his voice controlled, but I've already made it clear that I don't need anyone's help to succeed. Mrs. Hawthorne's eyes narrowed slightly, but her smile never faltered. No one succeeds here alone, Jason. Not really. We all have our roles to play. And sometimes, the best way to get ahead is to understand that power isn't about standing out. It's about blending in, about knowing when to cooperate and when to step back. Jason felt a chill seep into the room. She was offering him a shortcut, a path that would guarantee success, but at the cost of his values. And he could see the look in her eyes, the quiet warning, choose wisely. Before he could respond, she added, we'll be in touch. Take some time to think about it. Jason stood up, feeling the weight of her words pressing on him. Thank you for the meeting, Mrs. Hawthorne. As he walked out of her office, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that the game was no longer something he could avoid. Mrs. Hawthorne wasn't the first to try and pull him in, and he knew she wouldn't be the last. The question now wasn't whether he could succeed without playing the game, it was whether he could survive at Ivy Ridge without compromising who he was. The next few days were a blur. Jason attended his classes, kept up with the student council work, and stayed active in the ongoing debates. But the constant tension in the air, the subtle manipulations, the political games being played all around him, began to wear him down. It was Sophie who saw it first. Jason, she said one evening, sitting down beside him in the student lounge, you're not yourself. What's going on? Jason stared at his notebook, unwilling to meet her eyes. It's just, everything. The pressure's building up. I feel like I'm being pulled in a million directions, and no matter what I do, someone's always waiting for me to mess up. Sophie was quiet for a moment, her eyes softening. It's the Ivy Ridge way. The higher you rise, the more people want to bring you down. But you know that already. You've been playing their game better than anyone, and now they're starting to realize they can't control you. Jason ran a hand through his hair. But that's the problem, Sophie. I don't want to play their game. I don't want to be like them. But I'm starting to wonder if it's the only way to survive here. If I keep going this way, I'll always be an outsider. I'll always be different. Sophie smiled, a faint glimmer of her usual confidence returning. Being different isn't a curse, Jason. It's your strength. They want you to fall in line, to play by their rules. But you've shown that you don't need to. You've already changed the game here. You're not the outsider anymore, you're a leader. And leaders don't follow the rules, they make their own. Her words hit Jason harder than he expected. It wasn't the first time she had given him advice, but this time, there was something in her voice that made him listen, really listen. You're right, Jason said slowly. I can't let them define me. I have to keep pushing forward, even if it means making enemies. I didn't come here to be just another pawn in their game. Sophie smiled at him, the fierce determination in her eyes a reflection of his own. Exactly. You've got this. You've been doing it your way since the beginning, and you're going to keep doing it. You've got the brains, the heart, and the vision. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The next week, Jason received another invitation. This time it was from none other than Ethan Blackwell himself. The invitation was simple: let's talk strategy. You're not getting anywhere alone. Jason knew that Ethan's offer was more than just an opportunity, it was a test. A challenge. But the more he thought about it, the clearer it became. He had to make a choice. He had to decide what kind of leader he wanted to be, and more importantly, what kind of man he wanted to be. As Jason sat in his dorm room, staring at the message, he felt the weight of the decision pressing on him. There was a price for power at Ivy Ridge, a price that he hadn't fully understood when he first arrived. But now, he could see it clearly. The question wasn't whether he could succeed, it was how much he was willing to sacrifice to get there. In the end, Jason realized that the only way to succeed at Ivy Ridge, and in life, was to stay true to himself. He had come this far by refusing to compromise, by playing the game on his own terms. And he wasn't about to stop now. Jason had made his decision. He wasn't going to compromise his principles, not for power, not for anything. But the path he had chosen wasn't going to be easy. As he walked through the ivy-clad halls of Ivy Ridge, the weight of his choice settled heavily on his shoulders. The game wasn't just about playing along with the powerful cliques, it was a silent war, one where every misstep, every word, could be twisted against you. And Jason knew that the stakes were high. The next few days proved to be a whirlwind of whispers and sidelong glances. The students who had once congratulated him on his success in the Ivy Ridge Challenge were suddenly quieter, more distant. The faces he passed in the hallways seemed to hold a new level of scrutiny. They were watching him. Waiting for him to slip. But Jason wasn't afraid. If anything, he found that the more they tried to corner him, the more determined he became. The only way forward now was to keep moving, unwavering, unyielding. That afternoon, he had a meeting scheduled with the student council to discuss their upcoming initiatives. He was prepared to speak his mind, to make his stance clear once again, he was not playing their game. The council room was packed with familiar faces, students who were either part of the well-established groups or trying to claw their way up the social ladder. There was Lily, the head of student activities, who had always been careful with her words, and Michael, the star athlete, whose popularity was only rivaled by his arrogance. As Jason walked into the room, their gazes flickered toward him, their expressions unreadable. "Jason," Lily said, offering a tight smile. "Glad you could make it. We've got a lot to go over." Jason nodded, walking to the table and taking a seat. He could sense the underlying tension in the room, no one was outright hostile, but the subtle undercurrent of competition, of power plays, was palpable. They were all waiting for him to make a mistake. For him to slip up. "We'll start with the upcoming events," Michael said, his tone casual but carrying the weight of authority. "Jason, we wanted your input on the charity gala. You've been very vocal about making sure we engage with the student body more, so we're curious about your thoughts." Jason took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "We need to make this event about the students," he began. "It's not just about raising funds, it's about showing the rest of the school that we're listening to them, that we're here to represent everyone, not just the elite few. If we want to make a real impact, we need to involve more students in the planning, and make sure the events reflect their interests." The room fell silent. Jason knew that what he said wasn't going to be received well by everyone. Lily exchanged a look with Michael, and a few others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "We've done fine without involving everyone in the past," Michael said, his tone slightly defensive. "I think it's important we keep things streamlined, focus on the more influential groups. The gala's a big event. We don't want to dilute its impact." Jason could feel the subtle power struggle. He was pushing against the status quo, and they weren't happy about it. "I'm not saying we should dilute anything," Jason replied evenly. I'm saying that we need to expand our definition of what's important. The students who aren't in the crowd are just as invested in the school as anyone else. It's time we acknowledge that. A pause hung in the air as the council members considered his words. Jason could almost hear the gears turning in their heads, trying to calculate how much of a threat he really was. Lily spoke up again, her voice neutral but firm. Jason, you're right that we should make the event inclusive. But there's a balance to be struck, don't you think? We can't just turn everything on its head without considering the long-term effects on the school's image. Jason's gaze never wavered. The school's image isn't just about appearances. It's about creating something that people actually care about. If we want to be leaders, we have to lead by example, not by what looks good on paper. The conversation turned back to the agenda, but Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. He wasn't backing down. He had made his stance clear, the status quo was not good enough. But as he walked out of the room, he couldn't ignore the feeling that he was now officially on their radar. The next few days felt like a game of cat and mouse. The more Jason pushed for change, the more the other students began to push back. It wasn't anything overt, there were no open confrontations or threats, but the tension was palpable. He noticed the way certain students avoided him in the halls, the way others whispered when he walked by. Then, he received a cryptic message on his phone. Meet me. 8 p.m. The old library. Don't bring anyone. Jason's heart raced. He had no idea who it was from, but he had a gut feeling it wasn't going to be good. As the clock ticked closer to 8 p.m., he debated whether to go. The message could be a trap. It could be a confrontation with one of the cliques who were starting to see him as a threat. But then again, it could be a chance to find out who was really behind all the whispers and subtle sabotage. At 7:55 p.m., he grabbed his jacket and headed out. The old library was the least frequented building on campus, and its towering structure and shadowed windows gave it an air of mystery and foreboding. Jason had never been a fan of it. But tonight, it felt like the perfect place for whatever was about to unfold. When he entered, the smell of old books hit him. The lights were dim, casting long shadows across the wooden shelves. He walked further in, the silence almost suffocating. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness, Ethan Blackwell. Jason, Ethan said smoothly, his voice low but tinged with amusement. I thought we might finally have a chance to talk. Jason froze. He hadn't expected this. He had expected to be meeting someone who was part of the student body, someone who had been pulling the strings behind the scenes. But Ethan? Ethan was part of the elite, part of the game Jason had so carefully avoided. What do you want, Ethan? Jason asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Ethan leaned casually against a shelf, a smirk on his face. You've made quite the impression, haven't you? Your little rebellion at the council meeting, it's got people talking. People who aren't too happy about it. Jason's jaw tightened. I'm not here to play your games, Ethan. I've made my choice. Ethan's eyes glinted with something dangerous. And that's the problem, Jason. You think you can change the game without consequences. But there are always consequences. You'll either play the game, or be crushed by it. Jason's fists clenched. He had made his choice. He wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. Then let's play, Jason said, his voice colder than he intended. Ethan chuckled, a sound that sent a chill down Jason's spine. Oh, we're already playing, my friend. You just don't realize how deep the game goes. Jason couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered after his encounter with Ethan Blackwell. As he left the old library, the weight of Ethan's words echoed in his mind, louder than the creaking floors beneath his feet. You just don't realize how deep the game goes. Jason had always known that Ivy Ridge wasn't a typical school, but now, after everything that had happened, after rejecting alliances, making his mark, and defying the expectations of the elite, he realized just how dangerous the system really was. The next morning, the atmosphere around him was even more charged. Everywhere he went, he felt eyes on him, people waiting for him to slip, for him to make a wrong move. The rumor mill was running at full speed, and Jason had become the subject of whispered conversations. It wasn't just the student council or Ethan who were keeping an eye on him. It was everyone. The battle lines were drawn, and Jason wasn't sure who was in his corner anymore. As he walked into the student lounge later that day, he found Sophie sitting alone at their usual table, her notebook open but her gaze unfocused. She looked up as Jason approached, and her eyes softened when she saw the weariness on his face. "You look like you've been hit by a truck," she said, trying to lighten the mood. Jason sat down across from her, running a hand through his hair. "Feels like I have been. Ethan Blackwell, he doesn't play fair. He's making sure everyone knows I'm not welcome in his world." Sophie's expression hardened. "I'm not surprised. Ethan doesn't like people who challenge him, and you've been doing that since day one. But you can't back down now. You've got this far by staying true to yourself. Don't let him intimidate you." Jason nodded, though doubt still lingered in his mind. He wasn't just fighting Ethan anymore. He was fighting an entire system, a system that was determined to crush anyone who didn't fit into its mold. "We've got to be careful," Jason said quietly. "This isn't just about us anymore. It's about everyone who doesn't fit into their little world. They're all watching. If I make one mistake, they'll use it against me. They'll use it against all of us." Sophie's eyes met his, and for the first time, Jason saw a flicker of fear. But it quickly disappeared, replaced by that same fierce determination he had come to admire. "We don't fight alone, Jason," she said firmly. "We've got people who believe in what you're doing. You've got supporters. Real supporters. And they're not going to let you fall." Before Jason could respond, the door to the lounge opened, and a few familiar faces stepped in. Lily from the student council, followed by Michael and a couple of other students who were loyal to the elite. They seemed to be keeping their distance but weren't exactly trying to hide their presence. Lily gave him a polite nod, but it was clear from the way her eyes flickered over him that she wasn't happy with his refusal to play by their rules. Michael's eyes narrowed when he saw Jason and Sophie sitting together. "Hey, Jason," Michael called out, his voice carrying across the room. "You busy?" Jason glanced up, and for a moment, everything seemed to slow. He knew Michael's game. He wasn't asking out of curiosity, he was testing him. Seeing if Jason would stand up to him, or if he'd fall in line like the rest of them. "I'm not busy," Jason replied evenly, trying to keep his voice calm. "What's up?" Michael didn't sit down, instead standing with his arms crossed. "We were just talking about the charity gala, you know, the one you've got so many ideas for. We're thinking about making a few changes. Some adjustments to your plans." Jason's heart sank. This was it, the beginning of their attempt to undermine him, to take control of the narrative. He met Michael's gaze. "I don't think you need to adjust my plans, Michael. You've heard what I've had to say. If you want the gala to succeed, it needs to be about more than just appeasing the elite. It needs to be about everyone. If you try to water it down, you'll lose the people who actually care about making a difference." Michael's jaw tightened. "You're not in charge here, Jason. You might have had your moment, but this is Ivy Ridge, and if you want to get ahead, you need to learn to play by the rules. And right now, the rule is this: fall in line." Jason stood up slowly, his pulse quickening. He wasn't going to let Michael, or anyone, dictate his choices anymore. He had fought too hard to let them take his power away now. "Then maybe it's time I rewrite the rules," Jason said, his voice low but firm. Michael sneered, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "You can try. But you'll find out soon enough that you're not as untouchable as you think." The tension that had been building around Jason exploded the following day. A leak, subtle but effective, had spread across campus. It wasn't a major scandal, but it was enough to plant doubt in the minds of the students. The rumors began to circulate that Jason had been caught lying on one of his student council applications, making false claims about his academic achievements. At first, Jason was confused. He knew he hadn't lied, but the rumor was so well timed, so perfectly executed, that it seemed too strategic to be a coincidence. Someone had planted it, someone who wanted to bring him down. But who? The rumors spread like wildfire, and soon, whispers were everywhere. Students were talking behind his back. He could see the way they looked at him, the way they questioned his every move. Even some of the teachers seemed to be giving him a second look, unsure of what to believe. Jason could feel the walls closing in on him. This was no longer just about student council politics. It was personal. Whoever was behind this was trying to destroy him, his reputation, his future at Ivy Ridge. Sophie was the first to speak up. "Don't let them get to you, Jason. You know what you've done. This is just a tactic to throw you off balance. They're trying to make you question yourself." But the damage had been done. The campus was divided now, some believed the rumors, others didn't. But the seeds of doubt had been sown, and Jason knew it would take more than just words to clear his name. It would take action. He had to find out who was behind this, and he had to stop them before they did even more damage. The game had shifted. It was no longer just about making a name for himself. It was about surviving. Jason sat in the dimly lit corner of the student lounge, staring at the phone in his hand. The rumors had spread like wildfire across Ivy Ridge, and the whispers were impossible to ignore. His name was now associated with dishonesty, and the damage to his reputation had already begun. But Jason wasn't the type to give up so easily. He knew the people behind this smear campaign were not just targeting him, they were trying to ensure no one ever threatened the system that ruled Ivy Ridge. But who was behind this? The weight of the question hung over him as he scrolled through his messages, trying to decipher if anyone had seen something suspicious. Nothing. No clues, no hints. Just more whispers and more questions. "Jason," Sophie's voice broke through his thoughts as she slid into the chair next to him. Her eyes were filled with concern, but her tone was strong. "I heard the news. This is bad." Jason nodded, still staring at his phone. "It's not just bad, Sophie. It's a message. Someone's trying to take me down before I can make a real change here." Sophie leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "I know. But we can't let them do this. We have to figure out who's behind it. If we don't, they'll just keep going. They'll destroy everything." Jason felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He wasn't used to feeling this exposed. Ivy Ridge had always been a battlefield, but now it felt like he was standing naked in the middle of it, vulnerable and exposed. "I've been thinking," Jason said, looking up at her. "The timing of the rumors. They didn't just happen. Someone's pulling the strings. And whoever they are, they've got a plan." Sophie leaned back, crossing her arms, her expression thoughtful. "You're right. Whoever did this isn't just trying to discredit you. They want to destroy your credibility. They want to make sure no one trusts you. The timing of it is too perfect." Jason's mind raced. He needed to find the source, the person who had planted these rumors, and get ahead of the situation before it spiraled completely out of control. "We need to talk to people," Jason said, determination creeping into his voice. "Find out who's been spreading the rumors. Someone's got to know something." Sophie gave him a sharp look. "Be careful, Jason. People are watching you. The last thing you want is to make the wrong move and give them more ammunition." Jason nodded. He was acutely aware of the danger he was in. But he had no choice. He had to act, or this would be the end of everything he had worked for. The next day, Jason started digging. He approached a few students who had been involved in student council discussions, trying to get a feel for who might be behind the rumors. He tried to keep his questions casual, acting as if he was just curious, trying to stay on their good side. But each conversation seemed to circle back to one name, Ethan Blackwell. Ethan had always been the leader of Ivy Ridge's elite. He had a tight grip on the social scene, and his influence stretched far beyond the classroom. Jason had already suspected that Ethan might be behind the attack, but now, he had no doubt. Ethan had the resources, the connections, and the drive to eliminate anyone who dared challenge him. Jason's suspicion grew stronger when he overheard a conversation in the hallway between two students. They were talking in hushed tones, but Jason's sharp ears picked up the words. "You heard about Jason, right? Looks like he's not who he says he is. I think Ethan's got him in his sights." It was enough to confirm what Jason had already known. Ethan wasn't just trying to push him out of the social scene, he was trying to destroy him completely. The question now was, why? Later that afternoon, Jason met Sophie in their usual spot. He could see the concern written on her face, but he also saw something else, resolve. "I've been doing some digging too," Sophie said, her voice low. "And it's not just Ethan. There are others. Some of the faculty members, professors who are aligned with Ethan's family. They've been quietly backing his moves." Jason's eyebrows shot up. "You're saying this goes beyond just the students?" Sophie nodded. "Yes. Ethan's family is influential here. His father's on the school's board of trustees, and his mother's a major donor. They've got connections in all the right places. If they want something done, it gets done." Jason felt a chill crawl up his spine. This wasn't just a petty high school rivalry. This was a system of power and manipulation, deeply entrenched in Ivy Ridge's hierarchy. And right now, Jason was standing at the center of it. "We can't just go up against him," Sophie continued, her voice full of urgency. "This isn't just about one person anymore. If we want to beat him, we have to expose him. And we need proof." Jason's mind raced. He knew Sophie was right. They couldn't take Ethan down without concrete evidence. But where would they even start? The power he held over Ivy Ridge was so extensive that it felt like everything was rigged in his favor. "We need to find something, anything, that ties Ethan to this," Jason said, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts inside his head. "We need leverage. And I'm not giving up until we find it." The next few days were a blur of secret meetings, half-finished plans, and late-night research. Sophie helped Jason track down key pieces of information, piecing together a web of connections between Ethan and various faculty members who had ties to Ivy Ridge's elite. But it wasn't enough. They needed something more concrete. They needed a smoking gun. Jason spent hours poring over records, looking for discrepancies or irregularities in the school's financial statements. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead they had. Then, one night, he found it. There, buried in the archives, was a series of transactions. A large sum of money was transferred from a mysterious account to a company linked to one of Ivy Ridge's top professors, one who had been a staunch ally of Ethan's family for years. The professor's name was Dr. William Harding, a respected member of the faculty who had always been loyal to the established order. Jason stared at the records in disbelief. This was it. This was the proof they needed. He quickly took a photo of the document and sent it to Sophie, his heart pounding. This wasn't just about the rumors anymore. This was about exposing a system of corruption that had been hidden in plain sight. But he knew that the moment they went public with this information, it would be war. There would be no going back. Jason sat back in his chair, staring at the photo of the documents on his phone. This was the turning point. He was about to expose Ivy Ridge for what it truly was, no longer the prestigious institution it claimed to be, but a corrupt empire built on secrets and lies. And Jason was going to bring it all crashing down. The days following Jason's discovery felt like a blur. His mind raced, constantly returning to the evidence he had uncovered, the damning transactions that linked Ethan Blackwell's family to Dr. Harding, a trusted faculty member at Ivy Ridge. Jason knew that the time had come to make his move. He couldn't hide behind the shadows anymore. The game had escalated, and now it was time to play. But as the pieces began to fall into place, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every step, every conversation, felt like it was being observed from a distance. Ethan had the power to control Ivy Ridge's social structure, but now Jason held the truth in his hands. And the truth was dangerous. Too dangerous to remain in the wrong hands. Jason met Sophie at the same old cafe they had visited countless times. Their usual seat by the window was empty, the afternoon sunlight spilling in as Sophie sat down, her eyes scanning the room with a quiet sense of alertness. Jason could tell she was nervous. He felt it too. The tension was palpable. "Do you think we're ready for this?" Sophie asked, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. Jason took a deep breath. He had been running through every possible scenario in his mind, weighing the risks and rewards. Exposing Ethan and his family meant they would be fighting not only for the truth, but for their futures at Ivy Ridge. It was a battle that could cost them everything. "We have no choice," Jason replied, his voice resolute. "The only way to beat Ethan is to expose everything, his family, the professors, the corruption. If we back down now, we lose. If we don't fight back, nothing changes." Sophie nodded, her expression hardening with determination. "You're right. We've come this far. There's no turning back now." They both knew what needed to be done, but the road ahead was fraught with peril. Jason had to be careful with how he approached this. He couldn't just hand over the evidence to anyone, it had to be done strategically. They needed to get it into the hands of someone who could make it public, someone who could expose the truth without falling into Ethan's grasp. "Here's the plan," Jason said, leaning in closer. "We're going to take this evidence to Principal Richards. She's the only one at Ivy Ridge who has the power to make a real change. If anyone can stop Ethan, it's her." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "You trust her?" Jason hesitated for a moment, remembering the few interactions he'd had with Principal Richards. She was strict but fair, and while she didn't seem overtly sympathetic to his cause, there was something about her that suggested she wasn't completely tied to the status quo. If anyone could help, it was her. "I don't have a choice. We don't have time to waste on second-guessing. If we want to make this work, we have to go to the top." Later that afternoon, Jason and Sophie found themselves standing outside Principal Richards' office, the weight of their decision pressing down on them. Jason felt the cool, polished walls of Ivy Ridge closing in, almost like a metaphor for the walls that had been built around them. But they had come this far. There was no turning back. Jason knocked twice, then pushed the door open when he heard the soft, "Come in," from the other side. Principal Richards sat behind her desk, her eyes scanning over a few papers before she looked up and smiled. But the smile didn't reach her eyes. She was all business. "Jason, Sophie," she greeted them, her voice calm. "What can I do for you today?" Jason exchanged a glance with Sophie, who nodded encouragingly. Jason's heart raced, but he kept his composure. This was the moment. "We need to talk, Principal Richards," Jason said, walking toward the desk. "We have something important to show you. Something that could change everything at Ivy Ridge." Principal Richards' eyes narrowed slightly, sensing the seriousness in his voice. "I'm listening," she said, her tone guarded. Jason took a deep breath and slid the photo of the financial transactions onto her desk. It was the evidence that tied Ethan Blackwell's family to Dr. Harding's shady dealings, and if Principal Richards was as neutral as Jason hoped, it would be the key to bringing down Ethan's empire. Richard studied the documents for a long moment, her fingers tracing the text slowly as she processed the information. Jason watched her, unsure of what she was thinking. But then, her eyes flicked up, locking with his. "This is troubling," she said, her voice cool. "Where did you get this?" Jason kept his voice steady. "I found it in the archives. It's all there." The money transfers. The connections. Dr. Harding is involved, and so is Ethan's family. They're manipulating the system to stay in power. Principal Richards set the paper down and leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. I knew there were rumors about Ethan's family, but this is something else. Sophie spoke up. You can't ignore it. This is bigger than just Ethan. It's about the whole system. If we don't do something, it'll stay the same, and no one will have the chance to change it. Richards was silent for a long time, her gaze flicking between the two of them. Jason's heart was in his throat, the silence between them stretching out far too long. Finally, Richards spoke, her voice measured. You've made your case. But before I can do anything, I need more than just this document. I need you to trust me, Jason. You and Sophie have brought this to me, and now I need time to investigate. I can't make any promises yet, but I can assure you that this will be taken seriously. Jason felt a surge of relief. It wasn't the immediate victory he had hoped for, but it was a step in the right direction. Richards wasn't dismissing them. She was taking it seriously. I'll do whatever it takes, Jason said, his voice filled with resolve. Just let me know what you need. Richards gave him a slight nod. I'll keep you updated. And don't make any moves on your own. Trust that I'll handle this the right way. As Jason and Sophie walked out of the office, the weight of the world didn't feel as heavy on his shoulders. For the first time in days, Jason allowed himself to breathe a little easier. They had taken their shot. They had pushed the envelope. And now, it was in Principal Richards' hands. But Jason knew this was only the beginning. If Richards was going to take action, she would need time, and in that time, Ethan would not sit idly by. He would fight back, harder than ever. And Jason would need to be ready for whatever came next. He glanced over at Sophie, who gave him a small, supportive smile. We're not done yet, Jason said quietly, but this is a start. Sophie nodded. We'll finish this, Jason. Together. The fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But Jason knew one thing for sure, he wasn't alone. And with that, he felt a renewed sense of purpose surge within him. He had made it this far, and now, it was time to see this through to the end. The days following their meeting with Principal Richards were filled with a mix of hope and anxiety. Jason couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every whisper in the halls, every sideways glance from students, felt like part of the intricate web Ethan Blackwell had spun to control Ivy Ridge. Jason knew that the storm was coming, he just wasn't sure how soon it would hit. It was late one afternoon when Jason received the text that he had been waiting for, meet me in my office first thing tomorrow. I have news. The sender was Principal Richards. Jason felt a surge of both excitement and fear. It was finally happening. The moment of truth had arrived. But part of him feared what Richards might say. If Ethan had already taken action behind the scenes, if the forces in play were too strong for even her to challenge. Jason tried to push the thoughts from his mind. He couldn't afford to doubt now. Not when everything was on the line. Sophie met him outside the principal's office the next morning, her face a mirror of his own apprehension. We're going to hear something today, she said, trying to sound confident, but Jason could see the uncertainty in her eyes. Whatever it is, we can't back down. I know, Jason replied, his voice firm. But we can't get ahead of ourselves. If Richard says she can't do anything, we'll have to find another way. The door to Principal Richards' office opened just then, and she motioned for them to come in. She looked calm, almost too calm, but Jason noticed a slight tightness around her eyes, like a person who had been carrying a heavy burden for far too long. Please, have a seat, she said, gesturing to the chairs across from her desk. Jason sat down, Sophie right beside him. Richards didn't waste any time. I've reviewed the evidence you provided me with, Jason. I've done a thorough investigation into the connections you uncovered, and I can't tell you how deeply this runs. You were right to bring it to my attention. Ethan Blackwell's family has been manipulating the system at this school for years, using their influence to control key faculty and administrators. Jason's heart pounded. The fact that Richards was acknowledging this, taking it seriously, was a relief, but the weight of what she was saying started to sink in. This wasn't just a battle between him and Ethan. This was an institution built on lies. Richards continued, her voice steady but tinged with a hint of frustration. Dr. Harding, along with several other faculty members, has been using their positions to funnel money into a variety of funds, which were then funneled directly into the Blackwell family's businesses. There's no question this is illegal, Jason. But the problem is, this is so deeply entrenched that it would take a complete overhaul of the system to truly expose it. Jason's stomach twisted. So, what happens now? Is there anything we can do? Richards met his gaze, her expression more somber than before. I'm not going to lie to you, Jason. The people involved are powerful. This goes all the way to the Board of Trustees. If I act on this, the consequences for all of us will be severe. There's no telling what kind of backlash we'll face. Jason felt his throat go dry. This wasn't just about a few corrupt professors, it was about the entire power structure at Ivy Ridge. And it was all coming down to this moment. Are you saying you won't act? Sophie's voice broke the silence, sharp and determined. I didn't say that, Principal Richards replied. But we need to be strategic. We can't make a move until we have everything lined up, until we have full support. If we expose this now, it will tear the school apart. We need to make sure we have the proper legal backing, and that takes time. Jason clenched his fists, his mind racing. Time. They didn't have much of it. Ethan was already circling, preparing for a final strike. Jason knew the window for action was closing fast. He couldn't afford to wait for the legalities. They needed a plan, something bold, something that would force their hand. I understand what you're saying, Jason said, his voice cool and controlled. But we don't have the luxury of time. If we don't act fast, Ethan will bury this. He'll cover his tracks, and no one will believe us. Richard studied him, her gaze piercing. What do you suggest, then? Jason sat back, the pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. This wasn't just about playing by the rules anymore. It was about taking control of the narrative before Ethan did. We need to go public, he said, his voice steady but firm. We don't wait for the legal team to act. We find someone with the power to help us, someone from outside the system who can make this news impossible to ignore. Sophie's eyes widened. You mean like a journalist? A big-name reporter? Jason nodded. Exactly. We get the story into the hands of someone who can expose everything, who has the reach and the credibility to make sure Ethan can't cover it up. Principal Richard sat silently for a moment, the weight of the decision clearly settling in. You're playing a dangerous game, she said quietly. If this leaks before we're ready, it could be disastrous for everyone involved. Jason met her gaze, unwavering. I'm already in this fight, Principal Richards. There's no turning back now. Sophie added, her voice full of determination, we won't back down. We've come this far. We can't let Ethan win. After a long pause, Principal Richards exhaled slowly, then nodded. I'll help you. But we need to move fast. I have some contacts who might be able to help you with the media side. But remember, once this goes public, there's no turning back. Jason and Sophie walked out of the office, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. They had crossed a line. There was no going back now. They spent the rest of the day making plans. Principal Richards gave them the names of a few journalists who had the influence to take down someone like Ethan. They would need to be careful, though. This wasn't just about presenting the evidence, it was about making sure it couldn't be discredited or swept under the rug. By evening, they had secured a meeting with a well-known investigative journalist, Erica Stone, whose work had exposed major scandals in the past. The plan was simple: get Erica on board, show her the evidence, and let her handle the rest. But even as Jason walked to the meeting spot that night, he could feel the weight of the storm that was coming. Ethan wasn't going to sit idly by while they made their move. He would fight back, harder than ever. As Jason sat across from Erica, he knew that this was their last shot. If this didn't work, if Ethan managed to turn the tables once again, there would be no hope left. "Are you ready?" Sophie asked, her voice filled with quiet resolve. Jason nodded. "We have to be." The storm was breaking, and Jason was right in the eye of it. The night was electric with tension as Jason and Sophie stood outside the doors of the news office, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. They had made it this far, and now it was all about getting the truth out. This was the moment they had been working toward, a public reveal that would change everything. Their plan had always been clear, but now, as they stood on the precipice, Jason couldn't help but feel the weight of everything they had risked. Exposing Ethan Blackwell's corruption wasn't just about bringing down one person, it was about upending a system, a culture, and an institution. Ivy Ridge would never be the same again. Sophie looked over at him, her face a mixture of nerves and determination. "You okay?" she asked quietly. Jason nodded, though he felt anything but okay. The truth was, there was no turning back now. Yeah, just waiting for it to sink in. They had secured a meeting with Erica Stone, the investigative journalist who had been tracking high-profile scandals for years. She was their last hope, their ticket to ensuring that Ethan's empire would crumble. But even with her help, Jason knew the battle wasn't over. Ethan still had power. He could manipulate the system, play the media, or even try to silence them before the story broke. Nothing was guaranteed. "We've done everything we can," Jason said, looking at Sophie. "We've brought the evidence. We've brought the truth. Now it's in her hands." Sophie squeezed his arm. "We've come this far. No matter what happens next, we did the right thing." Jason couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude for Sophie. She had been his rock throughout this whole ordeal. The one person who had never wavered, never doubted. Together, they had taken on the impossible. The office door swung open, and Erica Stone emerged, dressed in a sleek black jacket and carrying a notepad. She was exactly as Jason had imagined, professional, poised, and determined. She was a woman who had seen the darkest corners of the world and exposed them for the truth they were. And now, she was standing right in front of him. "Jason, Sophie," Erica said with a smile, though her eyes were sharp, assessing. "I've read everything you sent me. You weren't kidding when you said this was big." Jason could hear the gravity in her voice, and it only added to the weight of the moment. "You think you can help us?" he asked. Erica's smile faded, replaced by a look of solemn understanding. "I'm not sure if I can help, but I can certainly try. You're not just exposing a few shady dealings, you're going up against a well-entrenched system. People have tried to take down Ethan Blackwell before, and they've failed. What makes you think this time will be different?" Jason hesitated for a moment before answering. "Because this time, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for everyone who's been crushed under his influence. If we back down now, we're giving him all the power. We won't let that happen." Erica studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right. Let's get to work." Over the next several hours, Jason and Sophie walked Erica through every detail they had uncovered, the financial records, the emails, the connections between Ethan's family and Dr. Harding. They laid out the entire story, piece by piece, with Erica taking meticulous notes and asking pointed questions along the way. "This is more than just a scandal," Erica said, her voice focused as she flipped through the papers they had brought. "This is an institutional cover-up. If I take this to the press, it'll have a massive ripple effect. The question is, are you ready for the consequences?" Jason felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He knew the consequences. This wouldn't be just a story, it would be an uproar. Ivy Ridge's reputation would be shattered. Ethan would fight back with everything he had. There would be backlash, and not just from the Blackwell family. There would be students, faculty, and alumni who would do anything to protect the institution. But Jason couldn't stop now. He had come too far. "We're ready," he said, his voice resolute. Erica gave him a nod of approval. "All right. Let's make sure this goes as far as it needs to." The next morning, the storm hit. The headline in the local paper blared across the front page, "Ivy Ridge's Dark Secrets Exposed, Corruption, Fraud, and the Blackwell Empire." The article was a damning account of the corrupt dealings that had allowed Ethan Blackwell's family to control the school for years. It detailed the financial fraud, the manipulations, and the connections to powerful professors. And at the center of it all was Ethan Blackwell, the son of the powerful family who had been pulling the strings behind the scenes. Jason couldn't believe it. The story was out. The truth was in the world for everyone to see. Within hours, the news was spreading like wildfire across the campus. Phones buzzed. Students whispered in groups, and the atmosphere at Ivy Ridge shifted dramatically. No one could ignore what was happening. The institution that had once stood as a symbol of excellence and integrity was now under fire. But even as the story gained traction, Jason could feel the pressure mounting. He had known that this was coming, but the reality of it hit harder than he expected. Ethan wouldn't go down quietly. Jason had already seen what the Blackwell family was capable of. He knew they would strike back, and strike hard. The retaliation came sooner than he anticipated. That afternoon, Jason and Sophie found themselves summoned to the administration building. Principal Richards was waiting for them in her office, her face unreadable. "Sit down," she said, her tone stern. Jason exchanged a look with Sophie before they sat across from Richards. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. "I've been briefed," Richards said. "Ethan Blackwell and his family have already begun damage control. They've reached out to the Board of Trustees and are claiming that the article is an attack on the school's reputation, a fabrication, and an attempt to ruin Ivy Ridge's standing. They're threatening legal action." Jason felt his heart race. He knew this was coming. "What are we going to do?" Sophie asked, her voice a mix of concern and determination. Richard sighed, rubbing her temples. "There's little I can do now that the story is public. The backlash will be swift. But know this, I will not stand idly by. I will back this investigation as long as it takes." Jason's relief was short-lived, though. The real battle was just beginning. With the story now public, the fight for Ivy Ridge's future, and for his own, was only starting. Ethan would do whatever it took to protect his legacy. But Jason wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. "We're ready for whatever comes next," Jason said firmly. Sophie smiled, her resolve matching his. "We'll fight this together." As Jason looked out the window at the chaos beginning to unfold across Ivy Ridge, he knew one thing for sure: they had made their stand, and now there was no turning back. The final showdown had begun. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?